On the morning of my 15th birthday, I killed 3 things that would have swallowed a grown man whole, washed the blood off my arms in the river, and got into a carriage to be married. That is not a strange sentence where I come from. My name is Rainwolf, and I am a demon warden, the last one. There used to be many of us, whole families bred to stand at the edge of the demon forest and cut down the monsters that came pouring out of it, because no ordinary army could. Now, there was me. I had held that border since I was 10 years old, alone. For that, the kingdom paid me 100 silver a month. I want you to sit with that number for a moment, because I never quite got over it myself. 100 silver. A merchant's clerk made more. I lived in a hut, grew my own rice, and stood between an entire country and the things in that forest for the price of a decent pair of boots. And today, as a reward, they were putting a leash on me. That was the real reason for the carriage. There is a custom in this kingdom for dealing with a warden who grows too strong to trust. You marry him off. You bind him by law to a noble house of count rank or higher, to whoever's birthday falls closest to his, and you call it an honor. My closest match happened to be the 3rd princess of the Holy Kingdom of Aurelia. So on the day I came of age, they were chaining me to the crown like a hunting dog you keep in the good kennel, so it does not wander off. Across from me sat the man who was supposed to be my father, Count Ashford. I had met him twice. He was absent for the whole of my life, skipped my mother's funeral, and then surfaced 2 months ago wearing his best coat. All warmth and fatherly concern, the instant a princess entered the arithmetic. He spent the whole ride telling me, in a low, tight voice, not to embarrass him in front of the marquises, not to speak out of turn, to remember that men far above us would be watching. I said the things a son says. Yes, there would be no problem. Understood, Count. He heard obedience. What he did not hear was that I was doing math the entire time, counting how many days off this marriage might actually buy me, and whether my rice would survive a week without anyone to watch it. He looked at me and saw a ladder. I looked at him and saw a man who had found something he could finally sell. I kept one hand still on my knee, over the inside of my left wrist, the way I always did around strangers. There was a mark there, under the cuff, an old family thing I did not show anyone, not today. Today, it did not matter. I told myself that a lot back then. The castle came up out of the hill like a wedding cake, and the Count straightened his coat and breathed like a man about to jump. The hall was full of people who had never done a day of work that could kill them. I mean that plainly. Silken colors nature never made. Jewels worn in the middle of the day. Marquises and higher, every one of them. And the Count and I were the lowest ranking people in the room by a wide margin. A fact everyone there understood before we finished walking in. Heads turned. A few smiled the way you smile at someone who has wandered into the wrong door. The princess stood on a low platform at the front, Amelia. Pure white dress, no jewels to speak of, plain next to all that gaudy fabric. And I felt something I did not expect, relief. She looked normal, kind, even. If I had to be chained to someone for the rest of my life, I had drawn better than I feared. I remember thinking, in the flat practical way I thought about everything then, that she seemed like a decent person to be shackled to. That is genuinely the warmest thought I had about my own wedding. Higher up, above her, in a chair set deliberately above his own daughter, sat the king. He was watching. Not the way a proud father watches. The way a man watches a transaction he arranged. The Count took his place at the host's seat, cleared his throat, and began the announcement he had been rehearsing for 2 months. This, you understand, was his moment, his climb, his son marrying into royalty. The Ashford name pulled up out of the frontier mud at last. He got about 1 sentence in. The doors banged open and a young man came in shouting for everyone to wait. He was about my age, fine clothes, a good face, the walk of someone who had never once been told no. And here is the thing I noticed before I noticed anything else. The crowd parted for him, cleanly, like water. 100 nobles stepped aside all at once to make him a straight open road to the front, and not one of them looked surprised. The knights along the wall did not move. Nobody grabbed him. Nobody shouted for the guards. A stranger burst screaming into a royal engagement, and the entire room simply opened a lane and waited for the show. That was when I understood I was standing in a play, and I was the only one who had not been given a script. Beside me, the princess leaned in, and very quietly, so only I could hear, she told me she was sorry. I have thought about that apology more than almost anything else from that day, because she was not sorry enough to stop it. She whispered it and then let it happen. Let the whole thing crash down on me so that she could walk free of the leash they had built for the 2 of us. She handed me her chains and apologized for the wait, a soft face doing a hard, selfish thing. I did not hate her for it. I am not sure I have ever decided what I felt. The young man reached the front, went down on one knee before the king, and made his speech. I will spare you the performance. Stripped of the trembling and the raised chin, it came to this. He loved the princess. They had studied together, and forcing her to marry a frontier stranger for the sake of her birth was a cruelty a just king would never allow. He begged beautifully for her hand. The king answered him warmly. He named the young man as Cedric, heir to Duke Grandhurst, and confirmed pleasantly that yes, he and Amelia had shared a classroom. Confirmed the pedigree out loud for the room. It was all so smooth, so arranged. The duke's heir, the princess's schoolmate, the sudden noble rescue. The king was not surprised by any of it because the king had built it. The count tried. To his small credit, he tried. He sputtered that the interruption was outrageous, then caught himself and argued the tradition, that this marriage was how the crown had always tied capable frontier houses to the center, that it should not be tossed aside over one boy's feelings. He was not wrong. He was just alone and low and about to lose. The king let him finish. Then he turned his attention to me, and the temperature of the room changed. He asked me, in front of everyone, whether it was true that I had been hunting monsters since the age of 10. A ripple went through the crowd at that. Real surprise. The first honest reaction I had seen. 10 was young. 10 was unheard of. I said yes. Then he asked the question the whole thing had been built to reach. He asked whether I could use intermediate magic, the layered spells, Windblade Dance, Windhammer, the impressive sounding ones the court measured a mage's worth by. And here, I made a choice that I have never once regretted. The truth is that I only use one spell, a single basic Windblade, the lowest first thing any wind mage learns. The court would hear that and think me a joke, a border boy who never grew past the beginner's page. What the court did not know, what I had learned from books older than their whole magic system, was that a basic spell in the right hands is not a lower version of the fancy ones. It is the pure thing the fancy ones are a clumsy imitation of. My one Windblade had cut down things their intermediate magic could not scratch. I had spent years making it perfect instead of collecting party tricks. He wanted to know if I was replaceable. I could have told him the truth and watched his face. Instead, I looked at the king and I said, no. He nodded, satisfied, and said he would take it into consideration. And I stood there thinking one clear, small, cowardly, sensible thought, the same one that had kept me alive my whole life. Life is precious. I did not know these people. I did not know what a king did to a warden who embarrassed him. I wanted to answer the questions, survive the party, and go home to my hut and my rice. That was the entire size of my ambition. Get through today. Get home safe. I had no idea he was about to hand me exactly what I wanted and call it a punishment. The king said the word certainly, and I felt the count relax beside me, because certainly sounds like agreement. I knew better. Certainly is the word men like that use right before they take everything from you. Certainly, tradition matters, he said, and then, but we must move with the times. Then, in the space of a single breath, in one calm sentence delivered to a room full of applause, he abolished me. Not my engagement, me. The whole demon warden system, he announced, had been a mistake, an outdated thing. It was hereby ended. The war with the neighboring kingdom had wound down into a ceasefire, which freed the central army, and the army, elite, disciplined, decorated, would take over the defense of the demon forest from now on. The line I had held alone since I was a child was, as of that sentence, no longer my problem. No longer anyone's, really. Just a duty on a list somewhere with a soldier's name next to it. And as a reward, he said, warm again, generous, beaming, for the Ashford family's years of loyal service, he was granting us development rights to the frontier, the cleared land at the edge of the forest, a gift. The count actually bowed. He thanked the king in a strangled voice for his generous consideration. I nearly laughed. I want to be honest about that, because it is the ugly true thing. The land was worthless. I knew it, the way I knew the weight of my own spell. This kingdom was drowning in land, a whole grain belt in the south, fresh territory just taken from the neighbor the year before, more open ground than they could settle in 3 generations. Nobody was going to develop a strip of dirt beside a monster forest. The king had handed my father a beautifully wrapped box of nothing and called it a reward. And the terrible part was that I do not think he even knew it was cruel. He genuinely believed he was being kind. That was almost worse. Then he turned to Cedric and asked what reward the brave young man would like for his courage. You already know. Cedric asked for the princess's hand, swore before the whole court to make her happy, and the king granted it on the spot. Approved, blessed. And then, this was the flourish, the king suggested that since everyone was already gathered and the hall was already dressed, they simply turn this party into the celebration of the new engagement. My engagement party, paid for, largely, by my father, repurposed in front of us into their wedding announcement while we stood in it. The crowd applauded. Some of them looked at the count while they clapped, enjoying it. A room full of people who had resented his little climb and were delighted to watch him fall off the ladder. And Cedric, grinning ear to ear, turned to us and said the Ashford family had our permission to withdraw. Our presence, he explained, was no longer appropriate. We were being told to leave our own party. Here is where the hero is supposed to burn, where the wronged man clenches his fists and swears revenge, or breaks, or begs. I have played that scene back many times, and every time I am struck by what actually happened inside me, because it was none of those things. I felt relief. It came up out of nowhere, quiet and enormous, and I did not fight it. They had just deleted my entire life with one sentence. The border, the duty, the leash, the marriage, the whole grinding machine that had owned me since I was 10. And all I could think, standing in that cold, gilded room while a duke's son shooed us out like servants, was, it is over. I am free. No more forest. No more 100 silver. No more standing between these people and the dark so they could wear jewels in the daytime and never once wonder who paid for it. They thought they were casting me down. They had no idea they were opening a door. I looked at my father's humiliated face, and at the princess who would not meet my eyes, and at the king who honestly believed he had been generous. And I did the math one last time. It came out clean. I owed this place nothing. I had never chosen any of it. And now, by their own royal decree, I did not have to. So I did not argue. I did not clench anything. I turned to the count, told him quietly that we should go, and started walking. Behind us, the applause kept going for a while, muffled by the doors, and then it did not reach us anymore. The count walked ahead of me down the corridor without a word. His back was very straight. His whole plan, his climb, the 2 months of careful warmth he had spent on a son he had ignored for 15 years. All of it gone in the time it took a king to make a joke of him. I felt a thin thread of something for him. Not enough to call it pity. Just an acknowledgement that he had lost something real to him, even if what he had lost was only ever me, as a thing he could trade. I kept my hand loose at my side. I did not cover my wrist anymore. Out here, it did not matter who saw. I should have been ruined. By every rule of that world, I had just been thrown away. The last of my kind, made obsolete in an afternoon, handed a worthless patch of frontier, and dismissed from a hall full of people laughing at my father's name. That is the part they got right. They did throw me away. What they got wrong was thinking it would hurt. I walked out into the daylight lighter than I had come in, already turning it over, already free in my head, long before I was free anywhere else. And I thought about the cleared land at the edge of the forest that nobody wanted, the worthless gift, the box of nothing. I was going to find out what was actually on it. I had walked out of that hall already free in my head, doing the quiet math on a scrap of worthless land at the edge of the world. I should have known the kingdom wasn't finished with me yet. The daylight came later. First, there was one more room. A servant peeled the two of us off the corridor and steered us sideways. Not out, but in, through a plain door into a space with no windows. A dozen candles were doing the work the sun should have done. After all that gold and glass, it felt like being folded shut inside a drawer, and I understood the message without anyone bothering to say it. This was the room they kept for people who no longer counted. They had put us in it together because on the paper that still mattered to them, we were father and son. The man who was supposed to be my father sat on the low couch with his head in his hands and muttered at the floor. I caught pieces of it. His name, ruined. 2 months of climbing. Gone in a single bored sentence from a king who hadn't looked at him twice. I had known this man for exactly those 2 months, and I had not liked 1 hour of them, but watching him come apart, I felt something close to pity. In my old life, we had a phrase for the thing about to happen to me. It was the kind of thing where the person standing above you starts to bleed and decides the nearest body is the one to bite. So I made the mistake of trying to be useful. I told him, carefully, that we should just go home. He came off that couch like something uncoiling. Everything that spilled out of him was one word wearing different clothes. My fault. The princess, my fault. The duke's son who'd crashed the party, my fault. The king's boredom, somehow, mine. And when the words ran out, he stopped shouting and started swinging. Here is the part I want you to sit inside for a moment, because I did. I have spent every morning of the last 5 years on a border that eats grown men whole. That same morning, before any of this, I had cut down a bear the size of a house and a dozen of its cousins before breakfast. I step around things that move faster than sound. A noble who has never lifted anything heavier than a wine cup throwing his whole body at me was, honestly, the least dangerous thing that had touched me all week. So I let it land. I stood in that little candlelit box and let a grown man spend himself against me, and I felt almost none of it. His fists found my arms, my back, my ribs, and my body took them the way a stone wall takes a flung pebble. Noting the contact, filing it under nothing worth remembering. He believed he was breaking me. He was, at the very most, tearing my coat. I watched the whole performance from somewhere a little behind my own eyes and thought, mostly, that he was going to hurt his hands. I could have told him that a body which holds a monster border does not so much as bruise for a man like him. I didn't. Some quiet part of me had already decided it was kinder to let him keep believing it worked, and that was the choice. I knew it was a choice even while I was making it. I could plant one hand on his chest and end the whole thing, and let a fragile man discover in a locked room that his son could snap him in half without trying. Or I could hold still and let the fire burn down to ash on its own. I held still. Call it mercy, call it contempt. Some nights I still can't find the seam between the two. The strange thing was how far apart the two of us were standing while sharing the same small room. He thought he was landing a father's judgment on a son who had shamed him. I was measuring the effort in him, the way I'd measure a wolf that had already tired itself out, waiting for the moment its legs would stop. He was pouring the last of his pride into a wall that hadn't noticed him arrive. If I felt anything through all of it, it was that. The enormous distance between the story he was telling himself and the plain, dull fact of my ribs. He would never know how little he had touched me. That, more than anything, was what I decided to let him keep. When the last of it went out of him, he was breathing far harder than I was. Then he said the thing he had come into the room to say, whether or not he'd known it walking in. He told me, flat as a line in a ledger, that I was not his child. He said I could go anywhere I pleased, and it made no difference to him, and that from this moment forward, I was forbidden to carry the Ashford name. Then he turned his back and walked out, and the door shut hard enough to make the candles lean. For a while, I just stood in the settling quiet. I checked myself the way I check after a hunt, out of pure habit. Torn coat at the shoulder and along one sleeve. A little dust. Underneath all of it, nothing. Not a bruise, not an ache, not a single honest mark. A man had put everything he owned into me and left less behind than a low branch does on a bad day in the forest. I said it out loud to the empty room because it struck me as genuinely funny. Yeah, I'm being treated pretty badly here. Then the real weight of the day arrived, and it had nothing to do with the beating. I was not a frontier noble anymore. I was not any kind of noble. No name, no rank, no border waiting for me. The leash they had kept clipped to me my whole life had just been unhooked by the very man holding it, and he had done it certain he was punishing me. I turned the shape of it over in my hands. Oh, I said, so I'm unemployed now. It should have frightened me. It didn't. It felt like a window swinging open in a room I hadn't realized was airless. There was, when I went looking, exactly one thread left that could still have pulled me back toward that country. And a few weeks before, without understanding that was what I was doing, I had already cut it myself. Jill's shop was the only bookstore in the frontier town, and for years I had been most of its business. The last time I stood in it, he had 3 new magic books waiting on the counter, the way he always did, because he knew I'd come. Old man, kind eyes, hands that shook a little now over the pages. He couldn't read a word of the ancient script himself. He just knew I could, and he'd spent years hunting the books down for a boy nobody else in that town would sit and talk to. He named a price that was far too low, 3 silver for the 3 of them, when one alone usually ran near that. That's cheap, I said, and looked up at him. He busied his hands squaring a stack that didn't need squaring. That was how I learned he was leaving. His granddaughter and her husband had asked him to come live with them across the border, he told me, and keep their books for the family trade. He was old. The shop had been dying for years. It was time. I did the arithmetic without meaning to. 2 months of hard road between here and that capital, and a border I could never leave for longer than a day. We both knew what the low price really was. It was a goodbye he didn't have the heart to say plainly. He had 10 days to empty the shop, and he told me, almost cheerful about it, that whatever didn't sell, he'd have to burn. There was no one else to sell it to. So I bought the lot. Every book left on every shelf, for a fistful of silver I'd been saving out of change for years. Are you sure? He blinked at me. You always carry your whole fortune on you, lad? Safer that way, I told him, with an empty house. It wasn't a lie, exactly. It just wasn't the true reason. The true reason was the thing I never showed anyone. I laid a hand flat on the shelves and folded every book on them into a space that isn't a space. A storehouse only I can open, where nothing rots and nothing weighs anything. The ancient magicians left it behind, along with the books that taught me how. I'd been quietly carrying my whole life around in it for years. When it was done, the shelves were bare, and it was time. "I owe you one," he said at the door, gruff, not looking straight at me. I told him to be well, and something got tangled in my throat, and what came out instead of his name was the other word, Dad. I heard it leave my mouth and pretended I hadn't. He pretended too, kind enough to let it go. He left at noon with a merchant caravan. He'd found me after my mother died, when I was small and alone, and exactly the sort of thing the adults around me had started to look at like a resource. A boy with a boarder and no one to guard him. Jill had simply decided, for no reason that ever benefited him, that I was worth sitting with. He kept books I could read waiting on his counter. He talked to me like a person and not a tool with a job attached. In 15 years, he was the one man in that whole country who ever chose me on purpose and asked nothing back for it. And now I'd folded his shop into a pocket of empty air and watched his caravan roll north, and that was that. I did not walk him to the gate. I said it at the shop, and I let him go, and I told myself it was the road that made visits impossible, and not the fact that I already knew we would never manage one. That had been weeks ago. Now the old man was gone across a border of his own, and the last person in this whole country who'd ever chosen me had gone with him, which meant there was nothing left to keep. I walked out of the castle in my torn coat, and nobody stopped me. A nameless nobody in ruined clothes isn't worth a guard's attention. Out through the gates, down through the streets, past shopkeepers and servants, and well-fed citizens who turned to watch me go. I knew that look. It had followed me the whole way here, a month and a half of it, riding in an open cargo cart at the tail of the caravan, while a knight explained that the back of a luggage wagon was exactly where a barbarian demon warden belonged. I had held a kingdom's border alone since I was 10 years old, and they had packed me behind the good carriage like a crate. Let them stare. I did the sums as I walked, and they came out clean and simple for the first time in my life. My mother's mementos were folded away with everything else I owned, safe where only I could reach them. There was no house I needed, no rank I'd miss, no debt I still carried. I owed this kingdom exactly nothing, so I would leave it, not tomorrow. Not once I'd found somewhere sensible to go, now and far, and I would build whatever came next somewhere that had never heard the Ashford name, since I wasn't allowed to carry it anyway. The streets thinned, the walls fell behind me, and then the land simply opened, a vast grassland running flat and gold to the edge of the sky. I walked a good while out into it, until the capital was a smudge behind me, and I was well past the ring of magic detectors the city keeps strung around itself. Near the walls, even a little real magic trips the alarms and brings men with attack wands running. Out here, there was only grass, and wind, and me, which raised a practical question. A foreign country was a long way off, and I had no intention of buying a horse. I had always wanted to fly, not the way birds do. I'm no bird, and I've never been graceful. I wanted to do it the way a man from my old world would do it, which is to say badly, with brute force and a rough idea of the physics. A rocket. Point enough thrust straight down at the ground and let it throw you at the sky. My wind blade wasn't only for cutting. I could flatten the tip of it into a broad, blunt hammer of air and fire it out from under my own boots. In theory, that would launch me. In theory. I am, I should mention, a careful man about the things that matter. So I did the safety work first. I layered fortification over myself until my skin might as well have been armor, then wrapped a windshield around that to keep the air from flaying me on the way. Then I built the spell under my feet, and I tuned it to fire for exactly 10 seconds. And I looked at the enormous empty sky, and I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt like a kid about to do something spectacularly stupid. "Shall I give it a try?" I said, to no one at all. I set my feet. I counted myself down. 3, 2, 1, go. I want to be clear that the spell worked perfectly. That was the problem. The blast went off beneath me like a struck anvil, and the whole world dropped away at once. I did not rise. I was thrown, hurled off the grass, and into the open air at a speed I had badly failed to calculate. The wind screaming flat against the shield, the ground shrinking to a green blur and then to nothing. 10 seconds is a very long time when each one carries you the length of a valley. Somewhere in there, I stopped thinking about foreign countries and started thinking about landings. And here is the thing I did not expect. tearing across the sky with the wind screaming and the ground gone. I was not afraid. Under the noise of it, somewhere below the part of me busy recalculating angles, I was laughing. 2 lives I had lived now, and both of them spent holding still. Bent over a desk until it killed me. Bent over a border until they threw me off it. I had never once in either of them done a single reckless thing purely because I wanted to. This was the first. It was going catastrophically wrong, and it was mine, and no one on the ground could reach up and clip a leash back onto a shooting star. I had wanted to leave. I had wanted it clean and total. No home to get back to. No leash. No name I had to answer to. I got exactly that, and then some. The freest thing I had ever done in either of my lives, and I had overshot it by a country mile the very first try. The capital was gone behind me. The whole kingdom was gone behind me. Anyone watching from the ground that afternoon would have seen a single bright streak tear across the sky and vanish, like a star that had decided, all at once, to go somewhere else. I had absolutely no idea where I was going to come down. Somewhere over a country I had never learned the name of, still falling out of the sky. I was as far from the royal capital as a living man could get, which is why I did not see this next part. I put it together later, the slow way you hear about weather in a house you used to live in, secondhand, out of date, and truer than the people still inside it wanted to admit. The morning after they threw my family into the street, the king sat down with his council and let them tell him how clever he had been. They praised him for it. 3 problems solved with 1 signature, and every man at that table said so warmly, the way men say things when they want to be remembered saying them. Then the numbers arrived, and the warmth started to leak out of the room. The military minister wanted more funds. He explained it carefully, the way you explain a thing you hope no one looks at too closely. The forest expedition had cost them tenfold what it cost before, 10 times the coin in a single month to do the work one boarder had always quietly done for free. He argued the magic stones would cover it. That was the whole plan. Send the army in, haul the stones out, sell them, come out ahead. The finance minister put a stop to that. The stones the army was dragging back were poor, thin. On the open market, they fetched barely half what the old ones had, and half of a great deal of money is a loss you measure in thousands of gold. Next month's budget would have to shrink by exactly that much, he said, or they would have to start selling off the army's own resort grounds just to close the hole. The military minister took that as an insult to his soldiers and said so loudly. The 2 of them went at each other across the table, and the king let them because he had thought of something better, the stipend. The wardens had been paid a stipend, hadn't they? Redirect that into the army budget and the sums would balance. He turned to his interior minister and asked what it came to, and this is the part I would have paid silver to watch. The minister did not want to answer. He hedged, went quiet, got cornered by his own king, and finally gave up the number. The warden who had held that border, who kept the good stones flowing and the monsters in the trees, alone, for years, had been paid 100 silver a month. 100 silver. Not gold, silver. Less than that gilded room cost to keep warm through a single winter. Nobody laughed. For a long moment, the arithmetic just sat there on the table where anyone could look at it, and every man in that room ran the same sum, reached the same number, and decided one by one, not to say it out loud, 10 times the cost, half the return, to replace one boy on 100 silver a month. The king felt it, I think, that thin cold thread pulling somewhere under the ribs, the first quiet suspicion that he had thrown away something whose size he had never bothered to measure. And because sitting in that feeling was unbearable, he did what men like him always do. He reached for a bigger number to bury the small one. He would send the night order, real mages, trained ones, not some barefoot child on the edge of the map. If a 10-year-old had held that forest with basic wind magic, he told the room, a full company of knights would hardly feel the weight of it. The knight leader stood and agreed, proud to be asked, and that was the last easy meeting that kingdom would ever hold. They simply had not been told yet. Meanwhile, I was lying at the bottom of a crater I had made with my own face, doing the math on how I had gotten there. I climbed out slowly. Everything still worked, which said more about my defensive magic than about my judgment. I had layered sturdy over myself before the launch and packed on every scrap of high defense gear I owned, and that was the only reason I was a man climbing out of a hole instead of a wide stain at the bottom of it. Without it, the ground would have taken me the way a boot takes an ant. 3 mistakes. I counted them off, because counting is what I do when I have been an idiot. 1. I had aimed the thrust too flat, so I went far instead of high and came down long. 2. I had left wind avoidance running, which peeled the air resistance off me entirely, and a body with nothing to slow it just keeps getting faster. 3. And this was the truly stupid one. The wind hammer I built to launch myself had run for 10 full seconds, shoving me forward the whole way. So by the time it quit, I was already a shooting star, and the only thing left to do was fall. No use crying over spilled milk. I had at least done what I set out to do, reached a distant country where no one had ever heard the name they took from me. I told myself I was never doing that again, and meant it about as much as anyone ever means that. The forest was thick and unfamiliar. I found a game trail wide enough to say something large used it. Bears, maybe, from the churn of it, and followed it, because a trail goes somewhere. If I found nothing by dark, I would sleep in a tree. I was tired in the specific way of a man who has fallen out of the sky and has no one to complain to. Then the trees opened, and there was a village. It was not much of a village, fewer than 10 houses, each leaning on the next to stay up. No wall, no ditch, no gate, just a handful of tired buildings in the open, with the forest at their backs, poor in the deep, settled way that tells you it has been poor a long time. I could have circled the whole place on foot in under an hour, and there was probably nothing worth stopping for. I was already half decided to keep walking. Then a girl came at me, like the last hour of a market day. Red hair, proper red, the color of a struck match, and eyes to match, sharp and bright, and fixed on me like I was a debt she meant to collect. She could not have been much older than I was. She planted herself in front of me and asked if I was the new settler. I opened my mouth to explain that I was not, in fact, anyone's settler, that I had simply fallen out of the sky and wandered in off a bear trail. She was not interested in any of that. Just you? She looked past me for a cart, a wife, a mule, anything, and found only me. Well, there's a mountain of work, so hurry up and get in here. I tried again. She rolled straight over it, hands going to her hips, chin coming up like she had rehearsed being underestimated and lost patience for it. Don't tell me you're too tired to work today. Come on, inside. Get yourself ready. There is a particular kind of person who has decided how a thing is going to go and simply will not hear otherwise. Arguing with them is like arguing with weather, and some tired, contrary part of me was curious how far she would carry it before she noticed I had never once agreed. So I let her march me into the village. She brought me to a patch of ground on the far side of the houses, a weed-choked lot, the grass gone to seed and higher than my knees, the tree line close on one side. She swept a hand across it like she was presenting a manor. "This is your land," she told me. "Use it however you like. Just make sure you pay your taxes properly." I looked at the weeds, then at her. She was already half turned toward the next thing, and I still did not have a single useful fact. Not what I was meant to grow, not who took the taxes, not what this place even was. Then a voice called from among the houses, sharp with some small emergency. "Arya, come here a second." So the girl had a name. She threw a look over her shoulder, already breaking into a jog. "I'm coming." And then, at me, a finger leveled like a blade. "You, make sure you're still working when I get back." And she was gone, red hair bright against the gray houses, leaving me alone in a field of weeds with an entire life she had invented for me, and not one instruction on how to live it. For a while, I just stood in the tall grass and thought about leaving. It would have been the simplest thing in the world. No one here knew my face. No one anywhere had a picture of it. A couple of boarders behind me, and even the count who wanted my head, would lose the thread. This girl had handed me a field and a stranger's life on nothing but hope, and hope is not a rope. I could walk into those trees before she got back, and she would never know the difference between a settler who left and one who was never really there. I let myself look at it straight. I owed these people nothing. I had spent my whole life being what other people needed and nearly getting eaten for the trouble, and I had promised myself, walking out of that kingdom, that whatever I built next would be mine, chosen when I chose it. But a man who runs before he understands where he is only runs into the next trap. So I told myself the sensible thing. I would gather information and keep the door wide open. What this place was, who ran it, whether the count's reach stretched this far. No obligations. If it got troublesome, I would be a rumor by morning. A village this small could not hold a man who did not want holding. And then, because it was getting dark and a builder cannot stand in an empty field forever, I reached into storage and took out my axe. No one saw me do it. The axe simply arrived in my hand out of nowhere, the way everything I owned did, A whole life folded into a space that did not exist. I shouldered it and walked into the tree line to cut what I needed. If I was going to spend a night, I would spend it under something I had made. That much, at least, I knew how to do. I was 3 logs into a wall frame when Arya came back for me. She stopped a few paces off, studying me. I had done exactly as told and not made a sound about it, and I could see that unsettling her more than defiance would have. Then, she squared her shoulders, put on the voice of someone twice her age, and told me to come to the main house. There were people I should meet. The house was the biggest of the sad little buildings, which meant it had 2 rooms instead of 1. Inside, in the lamplight, were 4 more of them, and not one was a grown man. There was a small boy, Leo, close to my own age, but built like a child, half of it, all sharp elbows and outrage. The second Arya stepped through the door, he rounded on her, hands on his hips, and demanded to know why she hadn't come straight back to report. She apologized to a boy who came up to her collarbone and muttered that her head had been full of the newcomer. I filed that away as the most human thing I had seen her do all day. A young woman with soft green hair and eyes to match caught the boy by the shoulders before he could work up steam. Carrie, his sister. She had the easy, tired warmth of someone long used to being the calm one, and she pulled Leo back and told him gently to let it go. Her hands, I noticed, were not quite steady. A small girl in the corner with pale blue hair watched everything and said nothing until she decided the room needed rescuing from itself. She looked at me, then at Arya, and asked in a flat little voice whether I was the one Arya had been with before. The new one. That was Sophie, and she had a way of looking at a thing like she was reading it off the inside of your skull. And one more, seated and still, blonde and blue-eyed, the coloring of somewhere much finer than this, holding a poise that did not belong in a falling down house at the edge of the world. Mira. She said the least of any of them, and what she said went straight to the point. With only 5 left, no wall and no men, keeping the village breathing had been all but impossible. She asked, watching my face while she did, whether the settler was really a man. 5 of them. That was the whole village, and the sum was ugly. They told me the rest in pieces, the way people tell a thing they have agreed not to dwell on. A month and a half ago, there had been 20. Then, some of the young men went into the forest at their backs, the dangerous one, the one that breeds monsters, and came running home with the monsters behind them. Men died holding the line so the rest could live. And after, this was the part that turned my stomach quietly. The same young men who had led death to the door slipped away in the night and took the food stores and the weapons with them. They left the women and children with the graves and the empty shelves, and a name so ruined that when Arya walked 2 days to town to beg for settlers, not one soul had answered. No men for the spring planting. No spring, really, that any of them could see. And there had been an explosion, they said, from the forest around midday. It had rattled the shutters and sent them all running for this one house with its one solid door. And Carrie's arms were still wound tight around her little brother because of it. I kept my face where it was and did the arithmetic on when, exactly, a certain reckless idiot had come screaming down out of the sky that noon, and I decided this was not the moment to volunteer it. So there it was, a dying village of women and children the world had thrown out. One bad season from being erased off the map, and I stood there, free to be a rumor by morning, and looked at it the way you look at a house with the roof half caved and the good bones still under it. I should have left. Nothing had changed, except that now I knew their faces. But Arya was watching me with that fierce, cornered, too young hope, standing straighter than her whole ruined village had any right to make her stand. Like someone who had been somewhere with soft chairs and hard rules and been thrown out of it, and had decided the only way through was to never once let it show. I knew that posture. I had worn it my whole life. I'll stay tonight, I heard myself say. I'll look at the land in the morning. It was less than they wanted and more than I had meant to give. Arya seized on it anyway, all business again. And then she stopped, went still, and something crossed her face like a door swinging open on a cold room. She had never asked my name. 2 days of praying for a settler, a whole afternoon of ordering me around a field, and she had never once asked what to call me. I watched the flush climb up her neck as she realized it, watched her open her mouth to fix it, and I thought, standing in that cramped, warm room full of the discarded, with a debt I had sworn not to take already settling onto my shoulders, that neither of us had the first idea what we were walking into. By the second morning, Arya knew my name, and by the second morning I had cut down a good part of the demon forest without the faintest idea that was what it was. I'd been up since first light with the axe from my pack, and I had a pile of logs as high as my chest and was proud of every one of them. Enough for a real house. A floor that wasn't dirt, walls that shut out the wind, a door that closed. I stood there doing the sums in my head. This many for the frame, this many for the roof. And for the first time since they put me on that cart, I felt like a man building something instead of one being carried away from everything he had. Then, Arya came around the woodpile and stopped like she'd walked into a wall. "What is all this?" she said, and it wasn't a question so much as an accusation. Her red hair was still tied back from cooking, and her eyes went from the logs to the tree line and back to me. "Why are there so many of them? Where did you cut these?" I pointed at the forest behind me, still pleased with myself. "In there. Plenty more where those came from." She went pale under the freckles. "You cut trees out of the demon forest." She said it slowly, the way you'd say it to a child who'd swallowed something. The demon forest, without asking anyone. What were you thinking? I had not, in fact, been thinking anything about demons. The word landed and rearranged the last 2 days for me all at once. The game trail as wide as a bear, the noon that had shaken them all, the fact that no one had a wall. This was monster country, and I'd been happily chopping into its front door. "Cutting the trees drives them out," she said, already backing toward the houses. "It draws them here, and once it starts, it doesn't stop for a month, sometimes more." She jabbed a finger at me. "This is exactly why men—" "Never mind. I'll warn everyone and think of something. You shore up whatever you can before they come." And she was gone, running, apron flapping, leaving me alone with my beautiful, useless woodpile and a very different kind of arithmetic to do. I could have left. That was the honest thought, and I want to be honest about it. I had a pack that held my whole life and a spell that could put me over the horizon before anything with teeth reached the first house. No one here had my name written anywhere it mattered. I could be a rumor by nightfall. I put my hand flat on the dirt instead. The magic that answered wasn't the flashy kind. It's just moving what's already there, and there was a great deal of ground and only me to move it. I dragged a trench out of the earth in a long curved arc around the near edge of the village, deeper than a tall man, the soil folding aside like water. Back home, a court mage burned half his day to dig one post hole. I did this the way you'd sweep a floor, and I did it because if I'd made the danger was mine to stand in front of. That was when the boy found me. "Hey, you idiot!" Leo came storming across the open ground with a green-haired girl a step behind him, both of them white with fear and fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done? If the monsters come, what are you going to do about it, huh? Leo, wait!" The girl caught his shoulder. "Carrie, I'd learn," his sister, steady where he was loud. She looked at the raw trench, then at me, and her jaw set. "You say you'll fight them. How? Monsters are strong. Even a master with a bow can't drop one, and you don't even have arrows." I straightened up and brushed the dirt off my hands. "I'm sorry," I told them, and meant it. "I didn't know it was the demon forest. This is my doing." The words cost less than they should have, and Leo's face did something complicated when he heard them, like he'd braced to hate me, and I'd knocked the brace away. "The cause is me, so I'll take down every last one of them myself. Every monster that comes out of that forest. You have my word." Carrie opened her mouth to tell me how impossible that was. She didn't get the chance. The forest told me first. They came out of the tree line all at once, low and gray and fast. Wolves, but the size of ponies, shoulders rolling, eyes like wet coals. I counted more than 10 before I stopped counting. A month and a half ago, a pack half this size had come to this village, and 10 grown men had gone out to meet it, and only 5 of them had come back. I did that math too, in the half second I had. Double the pack, none of the men, just me and 2 children and a ditch. And there was something wrong with the way they ran. They didn't fan out to hunt. They poured, shoulder to shoulder, heads low, the way a thing runs when it isn't chasing so much as being chased, as if the forest at their backs held something they wanted no part of. I filed that away for later. Later could have it. "We have to run!" Leo grabbed for his sister's sleeve. "Carrie, run!" Carrie didn't run. Her legs simply stopped holding her, and she went down onto the grass with a small sound, one arm out toward the boy, unable to make it reach. So I stepped in front of them, and I lifted my bow. There was no arrow on the string. There didn't need to be. I drew the empty bow the way I'd drawn it 10,000 mornings on a border they'd thrown away, and I set into it the only spell they ever bothered to teach me, the basic one, the one a whole kingdom had decided was beneath its notice. I loosed. The wind came off the string as a single flat blade, wide as the whole charging line, and it went through the pack the way a scythe goes through standing wheat. There was no fight. There wasn't time for one. One heartbeat, the ground was a wall of gray muscle closing on us, with the noise of a landslide, and the next the noise was simply gone, cut off clean, and the wind rolled on into the trees and shook them and died. Where more than 10 monsters had been running, there was open grass, quiet, and a scattering of small, dull stones cooling in the flattened weeds. Nothing got up. Nothing so much as twitched. The whole thing had taken less time than it takes to tell it. A grasshopper started up somewhere in the ruined weeds. That was the loudest thing left. I lowered the bow and rolled my shoulder, already thinking the stones would need collecting before something else smelled them. It was, to me, a chore I'd done before breakfast most days of my life. Behind me, very small, Carrie was still sitting in the grass with both hands over her mouth, and somewhere off toward the houses, a voice cracked open in pure disbelief. Amazing. Leo breathed it first, then again, louder, until it burst out of him. That was amazing. Big brother, you're a sorcerer. You're a real sorcerer. He'd been calling me an idiot 90 seconds earlier. Now he was orbiting me with his eyes lit up like festival lamps. And I'll admit the whiplash was good for something. It's a strange thing, being looked at like that. I'd spent my life being looked at like a tool you were faintly embarrassed to own. I could get used to the other way, and that thought was more dangerous than the wolves had been. Something like a sorcerer, I suppose, I said, and crouched to gather the stones. That's all the monsters leave behind. A hard little nugget, warm at first, worth good coin to the right buyer, and worth a great deal of trouble if you leave them lying around, because the next hungry thing in the forest comes looking for them. I went along the flattened line and picked them out of the grass one by one, and Leo shadowed my every step, narrating my own magic back to me with growing embellishment. Carrie had gotten to her feet. She wasn't cheering. She stood very still, looking from the empty grass to the new trench to me, and I watched her try to fit what she'd seen into what she knew about the world and fail, over and over, the way you keep trying a key that plainly doesn't work. She'd told me a master couldn't drop one monster with a bow. She'd just watched a boy in a homemade jerkin drop more than 10 without an arrow and hadn't broken a sweat doing it. I let her think whatever she was thinking. I didn't tell her that the blade I'd used was the shallow end of what I had, the one thing my old kingdom would even name out loud. Some doors you leave shut a while longer. Let them get their feet under them first, and then decide how much of me they could stand to know. Come on! Leo was already tugging my sleeve toward the houses, magic stones forgotten. The terror of 5 minutes ago wiped clean off him. Come on, you have to meet everyone. Come on. Leo hauled me in through the door of the big house, like a prize he'd caught himself, announcing me to the room before I'd cleared the threshold. The blonde woman rose to meet me. She had the poise of someone who'd been raised to receive guests in far finer rooms than this one, and she'd folded all of it down to fit a frontier shack without seeming to notice she was doing it. I am Mira, she said, with a small bow that belonged to another life. Please, just Mira. We owe you a great deal already. Thank you for what you did out there. The cause was me, I said. What I did was only fair. I hadn't meant it to land the way it did, but the warmth went out of the room by a degree, Leo's grin faltering, Mira's smile holding in place a half beat too long before she smoothed it over and let it pass. The way you step around a hole in the floor you've learned not to look at. There was a thing here none of them said out loud. I didn't press it. I've been the thing people don't say out loud. You'll have to forgive Arya her manner, Mira went on, steering us gently to safer ground. She carries this whole village like a mother and a father both, and she's far too young for either. We're all people with nowhere else to go, you understand. She won't let anyone take us anywhere worse. Arya came in on the tail of that, caught enough of it to color, and rounded on the actual business instead. The stones, she said. You did collect the stones? Leave them out and every other monster in that forest comes to fetch them. Then, grudging. I couldn't go out and do it myself. Someone dug a ditch around the whole village I can't get across. I can fill it back in, I offered. Or leave it and build you a bridge. She thought about it for exactly 1 second. Keep it. Build the bridge. A defensive line she hadn't had yesterday, and she wasn't about to give it up now that she saw what it was for. Neither was I. A drawbridge, then. A thing that could lift. The first piece of something I was already, without quite admitting it, designing in my head. I went back out to gather the stones and got sidetracked by my own ditch. I cleared it easily enough, a running step and a little wind under my heels, and I was over. Then I turned and saw Arya and Leo pulled up short on the far lip of it, the two of them stranded, and I remembered I was the reason they couldn't follow. So I knelt and pulled a slab of packed earth up out of the bank and laid it across as a bridge, quick and rough, the soil hardening under my hands. Arya stared at it. I was getting used to being stared at. Leo was across before it finished setting, and he'd found a new fixation. Teach me magic. He planted himself in front of me, chin up, fists balled with the seriousness of it. Big brother Rain, teach me magic. I want to do that. Teach me, please, just a little. No, I said. It's a lot of trouble. Just a little. Come on, just a little. Just a little. He'd picked the phrase up from some adult and clearly didn't know what half of it meant, and he strung it into a chant and followed me with it. Across the field, along the tree line, while I did a wary circuit of the forest edge, all through the afternoon. Where I was from, teaching magic to a commoner without filing papers with the crown could see a man ruined. Magic was a fence the highborn kept around themselves on purpose. I told him a piece of that, the simple piece, that it was troublesome, that the topic was closed, and he heard exactly none of it. And honestly, it was hard to stay annoyed at that much wanting. But want isn't a reason, and I had every reason to keep my head down and my gifts small. So the answer stayed no. At dinner, it was still no. When Carrie finally caught his collar and hauled him off me, the answer was no, and the boy let go and went quiet and slunk out of the hall, and that quiet bothered me more than the begging had. They'd given me the men's dormitory to sleep in, and it took me half the night to understand why the room felt wrong. It was the beds, 10 of them, in 2 rows, and everyone but mine was made up neat and empty. A whole hall built for men, and not one man left to fill it. I sat with a light orb hanging over my book and didn't read much. I did the count instead, the way I can't help doing. 10 beds, 5 dead in the last attack, the rest run off, and a village of women and children left to plant a spring they had no men to plant. It came out grim. The door eased open near midnight. Carrie, I came to apologize, she said, staying in the doorway with her hands knotted in front of her. For Leo, pestering you all day. He isn't usually like that anymore. I set the book down. Anymore. She looked at the empty beds instead of at me, and the story came out of her quietly. Their older brother had died not long ago. He'd been the one who filled a place like this, the one who'd looked after them. And after they lost him, Leo had folded up small and stopped asking anyone for anything at all, stopped being a child. You look like him, she said, and her voice caught on it. A little, around the eyes. I think that's why I should have stopped him sooner. I'm sorry. It was so good to see him loud again, to see him want something. She wiped her face fast with the heel of her hand and didn't quite manage it. Thank you. That's all. Good night. And she was gone, and I was alone with 10 empty beds and the low burr of the light. I lay there and thought about the ones who come crawling after a death. I was 10 myself when my mother died, and I learned early what circles a boy with no one left standing over him. Nobody had chosen me either. I'd built my whole life inside a box of nothing, and here was a smaller boy doing the same thing, reaching in the dark for the shape of someone who was gone and finding my face by accident. A little trouble, I told the empty room. I can manage a little trouble. I put out the light. I came out in the morning to find breakfast already going, and the whole population of the village, all 5 of them, waiting on me. Carrie nudged her brother forward. Leo scuffed up to me and mumbled it into his own collar. Sorry for yesterday, for being a pest. Do you still want to learn? I asked him. The apology evaporated. Yes, I want to learn magic from Big Brother Rain. Yes. He was up on his toes with it. A small tug came at my other sleeve, and I looked down to find the quiet blue-haired girl, Sophie, who I'd not yet heard string 3 words together. I want to learn too, she said. Then, after a breath, precise as a bell, thank you, Rain. Fine, I said. Both of you. I'd meant to teach 2 children in a corner. Instead, the corner filled up. Arya planted herself at my elbow, arms crossed. Mira drifted in on my other side with that pleasant, unmovable smile. Carrie hovered behind the little ones. It took me a moment to read the room, and then I had it, and it was almost funny. They thought I might be one of those, the kind of teacher who trades lessons to desperate children for things a child shouldn't have to trade. In a world where magic was gold and gatekept, a stranger offering it for free was a stranger with a hook hidden in it. So the whole village had turned out to watch my hands. Fair enough. I've performed under worse suspicion. You can all sit in, I said, and reached into my pack for the training cards. Flat magic tools, 1 to a person. Carrie took hers like it might bite, whispering, wasn't this frightfully expensive? But Arya turned hers over with the ease of someone who'd handled the like before, and Mira balanced hers without a blink. And I noticed that, and I put it away to wonder about another time. 2 women on the frontier who already knew the weight of a mage's tool in the hand. Nobody had asked me to notice. I noticed anyway. These let you feel the mana in you, I told them. You go your whole life never knowing it's there. The card wakes it up. 2 or 3 days and you'll have the sensation. After that, it's only practice. They bent over the little cards, all 5 of them, the loud boy and the silent girl, and the 3 wary women, in a hall built for men who weren't coming back. And I stood there in front of them, a man who'd sworn to owe this place nothing, and started very quietly to teach. I handed the first card to Leo, and the whole village sat down to watch me like I might steal something. There were 5 of them. Leo up front with his tongue between his teeth, Sophie beside him, still as a held breath. Behind the children, the 3 women lined the far bench, and they did not look at the cards. They looked at my hands. I understood it later. In this country, a magic teacher was a rare and costly thing, and some of them took their fee in ways a child should never have to pay. Lessons traded for years of service, or worse. Nobody says that part out loud, but Carrie sat where she could reach Leo in 1 step, and Mira had gone very still and polite, and Arya stood in the doorway with her arms crossed like a gate. They did not know me. They were right not to trust me yet, so I kept my hands where they could see them, and I talked. The tool pulls at the mana in the air, I said, tapping the card. That's all it's for. Most people never feel mana in their whole lives because they've got nothing to feel it against. This gives you something. Leo squeezed the card until his knuckles went white and got nothing. Mira picked hers up the way you pick up a letter you already know the contents of. Faint marks surfaced across the face of it, and she read them aloud and asked what they meant. Light at 2, null at 1. Attributes, I told her. Everyone leans one way. Fire, water, wind, earth, light, dark. And null, which is the plain kind that runs underneath the rest. You've got light, which is rare. That's a gift. What I didn't say, because it would have taken an hour and they weren't ready for it, was the real thing. Every spell in the world had hidden settings buried under the words, and nobody alive remembered to set them anymore. They cast with the numbers, all left at nothing. That was the whole reason their magic came out thin. I filed it away for later and let them chase the first small miracle. They chased it all morning. Leo failed. Sophie failed. Nobody minded. It was the most ordinary good morning I'd had in 5 years. The next morning, Sophie's card lit up in her hands like it had been waiting for her. Water at 1, null at 1. She looked at the marks, then looked at me and said nothing, which from Sophie was a whole speech. I gave her the shape of how it actually works. Not the incantation the others had been taught, but the thing underneath it. When you cast, I told her, you reach past yourself to a kind of great library and you pull down the true pattern of the spell and you pour your mana into that. Modern casters only ever learned to knock and wait. She was going to learn to walk in and take the book off the shelf. Arya said that made no sense at all. Sophie said, I understand, and closed her eyes. 2 days. That was all it took her. On the second evening, she held her small hand flat over a cup, and water spilled out of the empty air above her palm, clear and cold, filling the cup to the brim. She did it again into a bucket, and again, her face flat and calm the whole time, like a child folding laundry. The room went silent. In this world, a first spell took a year of grinding practice, sometimes 2. I had watched grown mages weep over less, and a quiet 12-year-old had done it in 2 days, in a dying village nobody wanted, with a card that cost less than a chicken. You're a genius, I told her. Because Rain teaches well, she said, and went back to filling the bucket. That was when Mira asked the question I'd been dodging. She said she had never heard of a school that taught magic the way I did, and would I tell her which one? And I had gotten comfortable, so I told the truth. It isn't a school. I learned it out of books from the old civilization. What I use is ancient magic. Mira's cup stopped halfway to the table. Even Arya turned around. I watched them work out what it meant, one piece at a time, and I let them. The magic their whole world lived on, the spells the great families guarded and sold and exiled their children over, was not the real thing. It was the scraps. A broken off corner of something enormous that everyone had forgotten was ever whole. Then the wind you killed the wolves with, Arya said slowly. That was modern magic. Same magic, I said. Modern's just the part that got handed down right. It's all one thing. Most of it only got lost. Nobody spoke for a while after that. I could see the questions stacking up behind their eyes, and I knew none of them were going anywhere now. That was fine. Some questions are a good reason to stay awake. The trouble started over which spell to teach first. I'd put Sophie on water, since that was her attribute, and it was gentle to learn. Arya stopped me flat. We should start with body strengthening, she said. The way everyone starts. The basic one. The first thing any child of a mage family learns. I should have heard the weight under it. I didn't. Body strengthening's actually one of the hard ones, I said. It runs on null mana, and it needs at least 1 null to work at all. Converting your attribute into null is slow and wasteful. It's a terrible first spell. Whoever decided it should be everyone's first spell got it exactly backward. I meant it as a small correction. I watched it land on Arya like a slap. The color went out of her face. Her mouth moved and what came out was almost nothing. That can't be. She said it twice, quieter the second time, and then she was up off the bench and the door banged against the wall and she was gone into the gray afternoon. I started after her. Carrie caught my sleeve. "I'll go," she said, already moving. "You keep teaching. It isn't you." And she was out the door too, calling Arya's name. I stood there and looked at the empty doorway with a card in my hand. Sophie watched me. Leo watched me. And I did the count, the way I always do when something has gone wrong, and I don't know why. Days I'd known these people. Not many. Things I actually knew about any of them. Almost none. I had walked in and started handing out the one thing their world used to break people, and I hadn't once asked what it had already cost them. I didn't know anything about them at all. It was the first time it had bothered me. Arya came back before dark, and the crumpled look was gone. Something harder had grown in its place. She sat down across from me, and this time, she told me, she hadn't been born to this. She was the daughter of a famous mage family, a count's house, all of them casters going back generations. And she had never once been able to use body strengthening. Not at 10, not at 12, not at 14. Everyone around her cast it in an afternoon, and she stood there year after year with nothing, until the day her own father decided a girl who couldn't manage the first spell was a stain on the name. So they threw her out, 15 years old, put on a cart, and sent to the far edge of nowhere. An aunt of hers, a Margrave, caught her before she hit the ground and made her chief of a pioneer village that everyone expected to be dead within a year. She'd carried that for years, that she was the broken one, the failure. And then a stranger walks into her half-dead village and mentions, offhand, that the spell she'd been beaten for never suited her in the first place, that the teaching was wrong, that it was never her. I knew the shape of that story. I'd been on my own cart, on my own worst birthday, with my own father deciding what I was worth. Two people thrown away by the houses that were supposed to keep them. Both of us washed up in the same forgotten patch of dirt. I didn't say any of that, but I heard it. "I'm not going back," Arya said. Her voice didn't shake. "I'm going to become a mage greater than any of them, and I'm going to make them look at me. Teach me, Rain, please." So I taught her. Her attributes read fire at 1, earth at 1. I started her on the smallest fire spell there is. I set a scrap of paper in an empty cup, told her the word, and showed her the pattern. "Ignition," I said, and the paper caught and curled into a thread of smoke, and Arya leaned in over that tiny flame like it was the sun coming up. Carrie watched from the doorway with her hand pressed to her mouth, already deciding she'd learn too. I'd meant to sleep apart from them. It made sense on paper. Back where I came from, a demon warden wasn't allowed to live among ordinary people. Bad luck, they said. Cursed work. So that evening, I told Arya I'd build myself a small place out past the moat, at the forest edge, close to where the trouble came from and far from where they slept. "Do the sums," I said. "It keeps you safe and it keeps you comfortable." Arya did the sums right back at me, and hers were better than mine. The harvest this close to the demon forest came in nearly 10 times what a normal field gave, she said. They had food for 4 or 5 more mouths without blinking. What they didn't have was a single grown man, and this country counted a village by whether it had a man's name on the tax roll. Not a family register. They didn't even keep those. Just a name. I could give them that much standing simply by existing under their roof. "You just being here fixes almost everything," she said. "So stay. Lend us your name. Sleep in the house like a person." I opened my mouth to argue the point, and that was when Leo wrapped himself around my leg, and Sophie took a fistful of my sleeve and would not let go. "You're staying forever," Leo announced, to the village, to the forest, to the whole cold evening, as if saying it made it law. Sophie looked up at me and said, plainly, that she wasn't afraid of me, and she never had been, and would I please teach her a great many things. I'd spent my whole life being useful to people who were counting the days until they could set me down. Nobody had ever grabbed my sleeve to keep me from leaving. Nobody had ever chosen me, and then refused to let go. I never said forever, I told them, which was true, and meant nothing, and everyone there knew it meant nothing. I stayed. I told myself it was until more men came to the village, which was a number that might never arrive, and I put my hand on Leo's head, and then on Sophie's, and something in my chest that had been braced for years quietly stopped bracing. "Take care of me then," I said. From now on. Behind us, the forest stood there in the dark, patient, and I didn't look at it. I should have. I didn't know it yet, but that same night, far inside the trees, the thing I'd built the moat against was already the wrong worry. The gray wolves were running, not hunting, the way they'd come at the village. Running, flat out and terrified, all through the dark. And they had been running for hours. Every so often, one at the back would falter, and then there'd be a sound wet and short, and the pack would be one smaller, and it would not slow down to see. Whatever was behind them moved on four legs, low, and it was built too much like the wolves themselves. That was the awful part. One of the fleeing pack glanced back, and for half a heartbeat mistook it for kin, for one more wolf running scared beside them, before it understood that the shape drawing level with it was the reason they were all going to die. It made a noise then, the thing in the dark, not a howl, something deeper, that the trees seemed to swallow. The wolf that had looked back was the next to fall. It went down under a weight it never saw clearly, and the last thing it knew was that the shape had been running straight toward the place where the fields smelled of people and cook smoke. The wolves had always been the worst thing in that forest. Not anymore. I never saw what happened to the men they sent to replace me. I pieced it together later, the way you piece together a thing every mouth in 3 provinces ends up whispering about. But I know how it started, because it started the way that kingdom always started things. With the noble deciding that the work beneath him was also easy. They called them the Second Knight Order, real knights, the kind with polished names and polished armor, the kind the capital trusted with the border now that the barbarian warden system had been abolished. Their captain rode a week out from the capital on horses he'd have called too good for common soldiers, complaining the whole road that a man of his blood should never have been sent to a place like this. The camp officer met them at the gate. He'd been holding that stretch of the border with too few commoner soldiers for too long, and he tried to brief the captain like it mattered, where the monsters came out, how they moved, why nobody drank after dark. The captain heard those last words and took them as an insult. His second nearly came out of his skin over it, demanding to know if the officer thought a knight couldn't fight with wine in him, when barbarians had done the job drunk on nothing but arrogance. In the end, the captain settled the matter the way proud men settle things. He'd allow 2 of his knights to stay sober. 2, out of a whole order. The rest would have their proper welcome, wine and someone to pour it, and the officer could find that from somewhere, or explain to the capital why a noble company had been received like beggars. Then he claimed the cores. Every monster killed on that border sold for good coin, and the captain announced that all of it now belonged to the order. The officer said the cores had always gone to the military, that he had no authority to sign that away by himself. The captain didn't argue with a commoner. He simply sat down to eat. That's the part I keep coming back to, not the cruelty of it, the ease. An hour before the forest opened up and took them, those men were annoyed about the vintage. Word came during the feast, monsters at the tree line. To their credit, the knights formed up fast. They'd drilled for this their whole lives, the clean geometry of a noble order, and they marched out to the clearing sure of themselves. Then they saw what the border actually was. A bear the size of a hut, and behind it more bears, smaller only the way a wall is smaller than a tower. The captain gave the order every child in the kingdom knew. Windblade, the first spell any knight learns, the same basic spell the barbarian wardens had used to hold this border for 100 years. If a warden could do it with Windblade, a whole order of trained nobles could do it better. That was the reasoning. It was even sound as far as it went. They cast together, a dozen blades of wind, more, all at once, nobody aiming, because aiming wasn't the point. The weight of numbers was the point. The spells flew true. Every one of them struck, and nothing happened. Here is the thing they never learned, the thing that took me one afternoon to teach a child of 10. Every spell has settings, hidden values folded inside it. How long it lasts, how hard it bites, where it stops. If you never set them, the spell falls back on its defaults, and Windblade's default is to end the instant it touches whatever it hits. It's built that way so a nervous student doesn't take his own hand off in practice. Cast it raw, and it opens skin, a shaving nick. On something with a hut for a body, that is exactly nothing. I set mine to stop at the back of the neck. That's the whole secret. That's the barbarian's dirty trick, not strength, a setting. One line of the old magic they had thrown away along with me. The difference between a blade that dies on the hide and a blade that comes out the far side. They didn't know that line existed. So a dozen of the kingdom's finest opened a dozen scratches on a monster that never felt them. And then the monster was among them, and the clean geometry came apart. The captain's last clear thought before the dark took him was that this could not be happening. The magic had worked. He had felt it leave his hands, correct and strong, the way it always had on the practice field. He had done everything right. He was a noble, and he had cast a noble's spell, and it had been enough for barbarians, so it had to be enough for him. Somewhere under the panic, a smaller voice was already asking the one question he would never get to answer. What did the barbarian know that I don't? Then a weight he never saw clearly came down on him, and there were no more questions. I won't pretty it up. Men died on that border in the dark, and most of them were the sort who would have spat on me an hour before. By the time the sun came up, the second night order was not an order anymore. The 2 sober nights lived long enough to carry the story back up the line, which was the only useful thing the whole proud company managed to do. And a story like that goes where stories like that go, up the chain, toward the men who had signed the order that ended us, toward a king who had been very pleased with his own cleverness. Not yet, but it was moving. The border they had sworn anyone could hold had just eaten the anyone they sent, and no amount of noble bookkeeping was going to hide that forever. I only heard the whole of it weeks later. At the time it was happening, I was worried about attacks. Back home, the worst thing in my life was paperwork. Winter was closing on the village, the season when nothing grows, and the only work left is keeping the forest from taking back the fields. This close to the demon forest, the land gave 10 times any honest harvest, so we had food enough for everyone and room to spare for more. What we didn't have was my name on a single official page. Arya worked that out one morning with the exact horror of a person remembering a deadline. Land could only be held by a man in that country. A stupid law, but their law. And the whole reason the village needed a grown man in the first place was to put a name on the tax roll. Nobody had ever done it for me. No letters, no registration, nothing. And the moving tax that came due when you settled somewhere new was not collected once winter set in. Missed the window, and it stacked into a figure even I would wince at. So we had to reach town and make me official before the first real snow shut the road. I'd meant to check the forest one more time before we left. A week back, I had walked the tree line and found it empty. No tracks, no calls, nothing moving at all. I'd told myself that was good. Quiet was good. I filed it under one more thing that had gone right and stopped thinking about it, which is a mistake you only get to make once. We said our goodbyes in the cold. Mira asked after souvenirs like we were off to a festival, not a tax office. Carrie promised to hold the place together, and she was the sort who meant it. I told the 2 youngest to keep drilling their manipulation work while I was gone. Move the water, move the earth, put obstacles in the way, and make it harder every day. Leo grabbed my sleeve on his way past. "I'm gonna surprise you when you get back," he said, already bouncing on his heels. Sophie only looked up at me, understood. Then she went back inside. The whole conversation apparently finished in her head an hour ago. Then Arya shouldered her pack, and the 2 of us set out down the road that ran along the trees. Town was 2 or 3 days on foot. No inns on that road, no tents in our packs. You slept on the bare ground and you kept a watch. And if you were alone, you didn't really sleep at all. Arya told me that part without meaning to make it sad. She'd made this trip by herself once, and she hadn't slept for 2 full nights because there was no one to take the watch, and something in that forest is always awake. I asked why she hadn't brought anyone. She'd wanted to leave as many people behind as she could, she said, to guard the village while she was gone. There were only ever a handful of them. Every hand that walked off with her was a hand off the wall. She kept half a step off my arm the whole way, close enough that I noticed, and turned down every offer to carry her pack. That was fine. Stubbornness is cheap to haul. We talked to fill the miles. The village, the winter, next year's fields. And somewhere in the middle of it, the way you'd mentioned the weather, she said the gray wolves had gone quiet. I asked what she meant by that. The wolves scouted the village, she said, same as they always had. They'd come to the tree line out of the demon forest every 3 days or so, look the place over, and slink back in. Close enough to count, far enough to handle if it came to that. You lived alongside it. You learned their rhythm the way you learn a clock ticking in another room. And that rhythm had simply stopped. They hadn't come in a week. She said it like a small mercy. One less thing to fret about heading into the cold. I stopped walking. I did the sums right there in the middle of the road. Wolves don't take a week off. A thing that has scouted the same fields every 3 days for years does not simply decide to quit. Not because the weather turned, not because it lost interest. There were only 2 ways a whole pack goes silent. Either they'd left the entire range for good, or something had driven them out. Something they feared more than they were hungry. And I already knew what. A week back, the same week the wolves went quiet, the same week I'd walked that empty tree line and called it luck, I had put a crater in that forest, a big one, deep enough to punch down into the parts of the demon forest no sane thing goes, the low dark places where the monsters that make wolves look like pets keep to themselves. because they've never had a reason to climb toward the light. I had cracked the roof off their cellar, and whatever had been sleeping down there in the dark had come up into the shallows the wolves used to own and shoved the wolves out ahead of it, straight toward the only warm, soft, sweet-smelling thing for miles, the village. 4 of them still in it, a road of forest between me and them, except it was not a road for the thing in the trees. For that, it was already close, maybe already there, and I was out here on a track arguing over a tax bill. I turned around. Arya caught up fast, throwing the tax at me, the window, the money, the fact that we were nearly a full day out already. I told her the money didn't matter. 100 gold, 200, whatever the penalty comes to. I'll pay it and never feel it, I said. What I couldn't pay was getting home a day too late to a thing I'd let out of the ground myself. She wouldn't move, planted her feet, told me I was being ridiculous, said we couldn't just turn back over a hunch about some wolves. So I picked her up, both arms, straight off the ground, pack and all, the way you carry someone who has stopped being reasonable, and I ran. She shrieked something about my manners and her own 2 working legs and the sheer impropriety of it, her face gone as red as her hair, and I let her yell. Yelling meant she had breath. Breath meant I was already moving fast enough that the words tore away behind us. The road blurred. The cold came apart against my face. Somewhere ahead, at the edge of the fields that smelled of people and cook smoke, the thing I had woken was deciding whether the village was worth a closer look. And the only person alive who knew it was coming was carrying the chief home at a dead run, a full day too far away, doing the only sum that had ever really mattered to me. Let me be in time. Let me be in time. I ran until the road stopped being a road and became a thing I was tearing through. Arya was in my arms, and she had stopped protesting a long way back. She had felt it too, somewhere around the 2nd hour, when the joke went out of my face and did not come back. She held on and stayed quiet and let me run, because she had finally understood that I would not have turned us around for anything smaller than everything. I did the sums as I went. It was all I could do with the part of my mind that was not just moving. A full day out. A predator I had shoved up out of the deep forest with my own careless crater. 4 people in a house with a moat that stopped gray wolves, and nothing bigger. I ran the numbers over and over, and they never once came out kind. So I stopped running them and just ran. The cold got into my chest. The trees thinned. Far ahead, low against the dark, I caught the first faint smell of cook smoke and turned earth, the smell of people, of home, and my whole body tried to go faster than it could. Let me be in time, I thought. It was not a prayer. I had never been the praying kind. It was closer to a demand I was making of the world, the one thing I had ever asked it for. Let me be in time. I was not there for the part that matters. I need you to know that first. Everything I am about to tell you, I put together afterward in the gray morning from 4 people who could barely get the words out, and I have laid it beside my own run so many times since that I can see both halves of that dusk at once. So let me tell it the way it happened to them in the house while I was still tearing down the road. It started as an ordinary evening. Mira had spent the afternoon fighting with light magic, trying to hold a spell back and release it on a delay, the way I had shown her, and failing, and feeling the failure the way she felt everything, quietly and too hard. Carrie called across the room that it was getting on for dinner. "Carrie," Mira said, setting the cold soup pot over the fire. "Let's put the dried meat in with the leftovers." Leo shot up with his hand in the air. He wanted the fire. He always wanted the fire. "Big sis Carrie, leave it to me," he announced, already climbing toward the hearth, and Sophie, small and silent, moved a bowl out of his reach before he could knock it and asked in her flat little voice what she should do. For a few minutes, it was only that. 4 people who the world had thrown out, cooking a poor supper in a warm room, arguing gently over dried meat. If I had been asked that evening what I had built out here, that room was the whole answer. That is the part I cannot forgive myself for. I built the thing worth taking, and then I walked a day away from it. Then the roar came. It came from the direction of the forest, and it was too big. Leo froze with his hand over the fire. "What was that?" he got out, and Sophie clapped her small hand over his mouth before the second word was finished. Carrie had gone to the storehouse a moment before. She came back through the door white to the lips, dragging it shut behind her, and she did not raise her voice, which was worse than if she had. "A black wolf came out of the forest," she said. "Bigger than anything I've ever seen." She was already killing the fire, smothering it with the flat of a board, dropping them into the dark. It might come over the moat, a ditch that had turned back gray wolves for as long as the village had stood. They all knew, in the way you know a thing your body refuses to accept, that a ditch was not going to be enough tonight. The first blow against the house came a heartbeat later, and the whole frame jumped. Carpenters from the capital had built that house to stand against monsters. It stood, but it groaned, and the second blow put a long shudder through the beams over their heads. "The girls' room," Carrie whispered, hurting them. "It's farthest from the forest." They pressed into the small back room in the dark and listened to the thing walk the outside of the house, testing it, patient, hunting. And then the window bent. The glass warped inward like water, and through it a huge dark shape lowered its head, and it looked at them, and it drew its lips back off its teeth. It grinned. It had found them, and it was in no hurry, and it wanted them to know both things. This is the part I have run in my head more than any other. Mira told it to me plainly in the morning, in as few words as she could manage, and I have been filling in the rest ever since, because I need to understand it, and I am not sure I ever will. She moved them out of the girls' room and into mine, the deepest room in the house, the one I slept in. She made her voice ordinary. She told them she had left something behind and would be right back, and to stay hidden and quiet until she was. Carrie started to ask her what she could possibly need. Mira had already stepped out and pulled my door shut, and I know from the door itself that she set the bar across it from the outside, so that the people I loved were locked safe behind good wood, and the only one left on the wrong side of it was her. Here is what she carried out into the yard with her, because she told me, and because I will not pretty it up. She believed she was the one who could be spent. The children learned magic faster than she ever would. She had been cast out of one home already for being the wrong kind of useless, and some quiet, wrong, unkillable part of her had decided long ago that if a price ever had to be paid, she was the coin. The lore said it plainly enough. A monster feeds on the magic a person holds, and after a single meal, it will often turn and go home satisfied. One life, and it might leave. One life, and the rest of them might see morning. So she pictured them. She stood in the open yard under that bleeding red sky, and she went through their faces one at a time, on purpose, the way you'd say goodbye. Arya, who bristled and cared too much. Carrie, who would be furious. Leo, who wanted the fire. Sophie, who moved the bowl out of the way. And me, running somewhere far off, a day too late. She told me she was not even frightened by then. Not the way you would think. The frightened part had happened earlier, at the window, when the thing grinned. Out in the yard, there was only a strange level quiet in her, the quiet of a decision already made, and underneath it, one small warm thought she kept coming back to, that for the first time in her whole discarded life, she had something she was allowed to spend herself on. She held each of them for a breath. Then she set her feet and turned her back on the locked door, and made herself the thing standing between the monster and everyone she had. That is not a girl who wanted to die. I want that said clearly. That is a girl who had decided the others would live, and had done the only sum she knew how to make it come out true. The wolf came around the corner of the house, the size of a carriage. She had known it was big, and it was still bigger than knowing had made it. It saw her standing alone in the yard, one small woman with no weapon and no magic she could trust, and it slowed, because even a monster is careful with a thing that does not run. She did not run. She stood, and she held its yellow eyes, and she let it come, so that every second it spent deciding was a second it was not at the door. She almost made it work. That is the thing that guts me. She almost bought the whole night with her own body, and it would have been enough, and it would have been the worst enough there is. Then a rope of water hit the wolf across the flank, and a fist of packed earth cracked against its shoulder, and both came from behind her, from the house. Leo and Sophie had gotten out. Two children barely to my waist had come through a window I had not thought they could reach, and they had thrown magic across a distance I would have sworn was past them a week ago. Magic I taught them for drills and games, and they had thrown it at a carriage-sized monster to save the woman who had locked them away to save them. Mira spun, and her heart came up into her throat. "No!" she screamed. "Run!" The blows did not hurt it. They were never going to hurt it, but they made it angry, and they made it turn. And now it was not looking at Mira anymore. It was looking at the two smallest things in the yard, and it charged. Carrie was already moving. She came out of the house at a dead sprint with her arms out for them, screaming their names, and I have measured that distance since, and I know what she knew in that instant, which was that she was not going to reach them in time. Mira screamed. The wolf closed. Two children stood in the open with their magic spent, and nothing left in their hands, and there was a whole day of road between them and the only person who could stop what was about to happen. I came over the moat. I do not remember choosing to jump it. I remember the fields, and the smell of home gone wrong, and two small shapes in the yard, and a black mountain of a thing bearing down on them. And then I was in the air over the ditch with Arya clamped against my chest, and I did the only thing there was time to do. I put a wall up. It came out of the ground the way I had shaped 10,000 walls in my head, and never once had a reason like this one. Stone tore up out of the yard in a single grinding slab, right across the wolf's path, right in front of the children, and the wolf hit it going full speed. The crash went through the whole village. The slab held. The monster staggered back off it, shaking its huge head, and turned toward the new thing in the yard, toward me, and for the first time all night, it faced something that had come to hunt it back. I set Arya on her feet behind me. I did not say anything. I had killed 100 things with the spell I used next, and I had never once been afraid while I did it, and I was afraid now, which is the only reason I remember it at all. Fear does something to time. The wolf turning back off my wall took a year. I could see Leo's face and the exhaustion in it, and Sophie's small hands empty at her sides, and Mira with her arm flung out in front of them like an arm was going to be enough, and Carrie frozen mid-stride, and every one of them was inside the same half second, and none of them could move fast enough to matter. Only I could. That is the whole difference between me and every other person in that yard, and I had almost spent it a day's walk away over a tax I would have paid and never felt. I set the blade the way I always set it, not to stop at the skin like the fools in their shining armor, to pass all the way through, clean, and end at the back of the neck. It is a small thing, that setting. It is the difference between a scratch and an ending, and no one in this world remembers it but me. Then I cut the wind. The wolf's head came away from its body, and the body did not fall like a body. It came apart into light and drifted down and was gone, and where a carriage-sized monster had been, there was nothing left in the trampled dirt but a single dull magic stone, cooling in the moonlight. The yard was very quiet. My hands were shaking. I stood over the empty place where the thing had been, and I could not make the shaking stop, and I understood, in a slow, cold way, that I had been one wall, one held breath, one heartbeat from being too late. Let me be in time, I had said to the world all the way down that road. The world had let me. It had come that close to saying no. Arya went past me before I could turn. She hit Mira at a run and threw both arms around her and would not let go. And the sound that came out of her was not a word at first, just the raw shape of one. Mira, she got out, over and over into her shoulder. You're safe, you're safe. She was crying so hard she could barely stand. And Mira, who had been so calm walking out to die, came apart all at once and could not answer, just held on and shook and made a small broken sound against Arya's hair. Leo and Sophie reached her a breath later. They had nothing left in them, no magic, no strength. They were gray with it, and they still crossed that yard and grabbed fistfuls of Mira's dress and buried their faces in her and refused to be moved. Carrie got there last, and Carrie did not cry. Carrie was shaking with something else. I stood a little apart from all of them, in the dark, at the edge of the light, and I watched the 5 of them fold together in the middle of the yard, and I felt the thing I had been running from my whole life catch up with me from the wrong direction. I had spent 15 years bracing to be thrown away again. My father had never chosen me. The kingdom had chosen my usefulness and nothing else. Every bond I had ever carried had been duty or a leash, and I had made my peace with it by expecting nothing, and expecting nothing is a wall that holds against almost everything. It does not hold against this. Nobody had ever taught me how to brace for the fear of losing people who chose me back. I did not have a wall for it. I stood there in the cold and let it go through me, and my throat closed and my eyes stung, and I let that happen too, and I did not try to look calm because there was no one watching, and for once, I did not have to. Come inside, I said when I could. My voice did not sound like mine. Something like that might come again. The window in the girls' room was gone, so we all crowded into mine. That was when Carrie finally let go of what she had been holding, and it did not come out as tears. She rounded on Mira in the lamplight with her fists clenched. "You idiot," she said, and her voice cracked down the middle of it. "You absolute idiot." She had the lore too. She said it fast and furious, that a monster takes one and leaves, and Mira had known that, and Mira had done the arithmetic and made herself the one. "You decided," Carrie said, shaking. "You decided that on your own. You didn't ask a single one of us. You don't get to just decide you're the one we lose." Mira did not defend herself. She sat with her hands in her lap and took it, because Carrie was right, and because Carrie was only saying it that way because she loved her, and everyone in the room could hear both halves of it at once. Then Arya pulled Mira down between them, and Leo latched onto one arm and Sophie onto the other, and the anger and the fear all ran together into the same thing. 5 people who could not be talked into letting go of each other in a crowded room that smelled of wood smoke and cold. I meant to sleep in the dining room. It seemed the decent thing. The children would not hear of it. Leo got a hand in my sleeve, the way he does, and Sophie just looked at me until looking was an argument I lost, and so I ended up in the corner of my own crowded room, awake, listening to the 6 of us breathe, counting them in the dark the way I used to count monsters. 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1. All of them, still all of them. In the morning, I got the whole of it, piece by piece, in that gray light. I heard about the delay, the failed magic, the grinning window. I heard the exact words Mira had used, that she had forgotten something in the other room, and how she had barred my door from the outside with the 4 of them safe behind it. I heard how far Leo and Sophie had thrown their spells, and I did not tell them then what that distance meant, only filed it away with a quiet ache, because children who reach that far under a monster's shadow are children who will keep reaching, and I was not sure yet whether that was a gift or a debt. And I told them the truth I owed them, which was that the wolf was my fault. A week back, I had put a crater in the deep forest with a careless spell and shoved something huge up out of the dark, and it had rolled the gray wolves ahead of it like a wave, straight at the one soft place in the world I actually cared about. They would not have it. All of them, at once, insisted it was not my fault. I let them say it. I did not believe a word of it, and I never will, and that is fine. Some debts you are not meant to argue your way out of. Then I walked the outside of the house alone. I put my hand on the corner post and felt it give. The frame was warped where the wolf had leaned on it. The beams sprung, the whole thing standing more out of habit than strength. Carpenters from the capital had built it to turn back gray wolves, and gray wolves were not what lived out here anymore. I had known that. I had known it, and I had spent my weeks teaching magic and growing rice and letting myself be happy, and I had called the quiet luck. I was done calling it luck. I stood in the frost with my hand on the failing wall, and I made the household a promise I did not say out loud, because promises you say out loud are for other people, and this one was only for me. No more moats that a big enough thing steps over. No more houses that stand out of habit. I would put something around these people that the forest could throw its worst against and break its teeth on. I would build them something that lasts. I had been given exactly one warning, and everyone had lived through it. I was not going to waste it. I did not sleep. I had stood at the corner post the morning before and vowed to put something around these people that the forest could break its teeth on. And a vow made in the dark is worth nothing until your hands are cold from it. So I went out while they slept and got my hands cold. First, I moved everything that mattered. The beds, the long table someone's grandmother had hauled all the way out to this frontier, Carrie's pots, Mira's book, face down where she had left it. I carried them all out into the dark and set them clear of the house, and I did it the quiet way, the way none of them had ever seen me work, the way that does not need arms. I am not going to tell you how. The family did not get to know the whole size of me until they could stand on their own feet without leaning on it. A man who is the only wall is not a gift. He is a thing you lose. Then I put my palm flat on the frozen dirt and told the ground to stand up. It came up slow at first, the way bread comes up. A seam split across the yard, and the earth on either side of it darkened and hardened and began to climb, stone pulling itself out of stone, grinding as it rose. I walked it up. I walked the first floor exactly as their old house had been laid out, the dining room where the hearth had been, the same doorways, the same short step down at the threshold that Leo always tripped on, because a home you can find in the dark is worth more than a grand one. Then I took it higher than a house has any business going, a second floor with no inner walls at all, one long open hall with pillars, room enough to swing a blade or throw magic across without hitting anyone, and over that, a flat roof, and set into the roof a small watch room with wide windows facing one direction only, the direction the black wolf had come from. The whole thing shrugged the last of itself into place, with a sound like a mountain clearing its throat, and the ground jumped, and behind me, the old warped house rocked on its sprung pins and groaned. That was the part I had timed wrong. I had wanted them to wake to it gently. Instead, they were going to wake to an earthquake. I climbed to one of the upper windows, sat on the cold sill, and waited for the shouting to start. The old door banged open, and they poured out of it in a knot, the way animals leave a burning barn. Leo first because Leo is always first, then Carrie with both hands out to catch him, then Arya then Mira with her shawl half on, then Sophie last and unbothered, still chewing on the corner of a sleeve. They ran 3 steps into the yard to get clear of the collapsing house. Then they stopped, because the house was not collapsing, and because there was a castle in front of it. Nobody said anything for a long moment. 5 people who had not stopped talking since I met them, all of them craned back with their mouths open, looking up a wall of gray stone that had not existed when they went to sleep. The new sun was coming in low over the fields and lighting the top of it gold, while the bottom was still in blue shadow, and their faces were doing something I did not have a word for. "What?" Leo said. "Just that." Then, louder, climbing. "What is this? What is this?" Carrie had gone the other way from him, backing up a step, a hand pressed flat over her mouth. Arya turned a slow full circle in the frost, as if she thought she might have come out the wrong door of the world. I leaned out of the upper window so they could find me. "It's a house," I called down. "I built it. The downstairs is laid out the same as the old one, so you won't get lost. There's a room up top that looks at the forest." I paused, because they were all looking straight up at me now, and I found I did not know how to end the sentence I had started, so I ended it plainly. "The old one was warped through. It wasn't going to hold. This one holds." "You built it," Arya said. Not a question, a thing she was trying to get her mouth around. "Last night. You built a castle. Last night. It's not really a castle. It absolutely was a castle. Come inside before you freeze. I moved the beds already." They came in the way you cross ice you don't trust. Carrie hung back at the threshold until Mira, who had said nothing at all, walked past her into the middle of the room, turned around in it, and said that if the ceiling meant to fall, it would have fallen already. And if it did, they would take it up with rain, but it was rain, so it would be fine. Carrie came in after that. The downstairs undid them a little. It was their home. The same hearth, the same table, already standing where it always stood, the same short step. And Leo tripped on it again, swearing in his small voice. Arya stood in the doorway of what had been the dining room and pressed her fingers to the stone frame as though checking it was really there, and said nothing for so long that I let her have it. Then Leo found the stairs, and after that, there was no more solemnity. The upper hall stopped Arya a second time. She walked out into the middle of that long, empty floor, the pillars marching down either side, and I watched her face change from wonder into something older. Her family had a room like this once, she told me quietly, a training floor where the ones who awakened their magic on time practiced, and the ones who awakened late were not allowed. She had been thrown out of that house for waking hers a season too slow, and here she stood in a bigger version of the room that had measured her and found her wanting, and it belonged to her now, and no one was going to tell her to get off the floor. "We'll practice here," I said, because she needed something ordinary to hold. "It's the only room big enough." Sophie and Leo had already vanished. They reappeared head down through a hole in the ceiling, delighted, hauling a ladder, shouting at everyone to come up and see. The watchroom at the top had windows on every side, and out of the north, the whole demon forest lay open below us, dark and endless, running off the edge of the world. "From up here, you'll see anything come out of it before it reaches the yard," I said. "That's the point of the room," Carrie asked, in a very small voice, whether ordinary people could learn to make a thing like this. She meant herself. She did not think she counted. "You and Leo, probably," I said. "Give it time. It's just moving stone. Anyone who can move a little can learn to move a lot." Carrie sat down on the floor, like her legs had stopped agreeing to the idea of her. Downstairs, Mira was already testing the new stove, and the smell of it came up through the ladder hole, and for a moment the whole impossible morning smelled like breakfast. I waited until they had eaten. A person hears bad news better with something warm in them, and I had bad news, which was that 2 nights ago a thing the size of a carriage had walked over our moat like a curb, and I had almost come home to nothing. "We're going to get you strong," I said, "and we're going to do it fast, faster than is polite. I don't want another night like the last one." Arya's hand tightened on her cup. I told her it would be fine, and watched her decide to believe me. Then I gave out the rules, because a group that knows its shape does not freeze when the shape is tested. Leo would learn to scout. Go ahead, see first, come back. Arya would hold the front, sword and magic both, because the front needs someone who does not move, and Arya does not move. Sophie would sit at the back and throw the big magic. Carrie would keep them all supplied and standing. And Mira. Mira's our healer. She set down her spoon very carefully, the way you set down something you are afraid of spilling. "Rain," she said, and she was still smiling, because Mira smiles hardest right before something in her breaks. "You may not know this about me, I can't use healing magic. I don't have the virtue for it. I learned the spell properly, from a proper teacher, and I have held the light over a cut no bigger than this and watched it do nothing. Some people are made for it. I'm not. I did not argue. I picked up the small knife by the bread and drew it across the side of my own finger, not deep, just enough to bead red, and held it out across the table to her. Do it anyway, I said. Say the words. I want to see it fail. She did not want to. She did it because I asked. The light came up around her hands, pale and even and perfectly formed. There was nothing wrong with her magic. There never had been. And it sat over the cut on my finger, and the cut stayed a cut. See? She said, and her voice cracked right down the middle of the word. It activates. It just doesn't, because you don't know what you're telling it to do. I kept my hand where it was. It's not virtue, Mira. It was never virtue. Healing magic won't close a wound if the caster can't picture how a wound closes. That's the whole secret. There's a lock on it so a caster who doesn't understand the body can't heal it wrong and kill someone. You've been throwing yourself at a locked door your whole life and blaming your soul for it being shut. She stared at me. When you cut yourself and leave it, I said. A day later, there's a scab. Your blood does that on its own. A thing in it hardens the second it meets the air and seals the gap. That's all you have to tell the spell. Not be good. Just close it the way it closes on its own. Picture the blood going hard over the top and holding. I watched her not breathe. Now do it again, I said. And this time, see the scab. The light came up a second time. Her eyes were somewhere far away, on some knee scraped years ago, some knight's arm the morning after. And under her hands, the bead of red on my finger stopped being wet and darkened and set. And the cut was gone under a clean seal of it in less than a heartbeat, the way it should have gone the very first time she ever tried. Mira looked at my healed finger. Then she came apart. It was not pretty crying. It was the other kind, the kind that folds a person in half, because she had just understood, all at once, exactly what it had cost her not to know a thing this small. There had been a man she was going to marry, a name, a house, a place at a table in the capital, and a commoner girl, a scholarship student who had scraped her own knees enough times to know in her bones how a body knits itself, had stood up in front of the people who mattered and closed a wound Mira could not. And that was the whole trial. She lost all of it and was put out of the only city she had ever known onto a road that ended in a dying frontier village. And she had spent every day since believing it was because something in her was rotten and short of virtue. And it was a scab. It was knowing about a scab. I was sent away, she got out, between the folds of it, for not knowing that. She was not really talking to us. I let them tell me I was worthless. I believed them. For years, She could not finish it. Carrie was already up out of her seat and around the table with both arms around her. I did not say anything useful. I am bad at this part. I told her, clumsily, that nobody had ever taught her, because nobody in this whole age remembered it either, that the not knowing was the world's and not hers, and I am not sure it landed. Carrie got her up and walked her out, one hand on the back of her head, murmuring the whole way. The rest of us sat in the quiet she left. She's going to be the best of all of us, Sophie said to her empty bowl in her flat little voice. Nobody argued. Leo, being 10 and made mostly of questions, could not sit in a heavy silence for long and broke it by asking what a scout actually did. So I told the three of them what their jobs actually meant. A scout goes ahead of everyone and sees the danger first, tracks it, counts it, comes back alive to say what's out there. It is the most important job in the party, and it will keep the rest of them breathing. Leo lit up like I had handed him a sword. That's the coolest one. It needs the smartest one, I said. You have to read the ground, learn the tracks, study. Ugh, Leo said, and every part of his small face fell at once. And Sophie made a sound that in a quieter child would have been a laugh. Arya's frontline job pleased her more than she let on. I said it wanted someone who would plant their feet and not give ground, someone the others could stand behind, and something in her settled at that. She had spent her whole life being told she was too stubborn, and here, stubborn was the qualification. Sophie. I put at the back with the big magic, and Sophie said only understood, which from Sophie is a signed contract. Then that's the shape of us, I said. Now I'll show you how to grow into it faster than the world thinks is possible. I put a small measuring tool on the table and had Arya hold it. It read magic a different way than the tools she knew. Not what kind she had, but which way it leaned. Hers told her almost nothing. A little toughness, a little quickness, a flat nothing where raw force should have been. She frowned at it like it had insulted her, which, to a proud person, it had. Here was the part most casters in this world had forgotten. Your magic quietly strengthens your whole body all the time, and you can lean that strengthening on purpose, half again as strong in the one direction you choose. Leo. I would tilt toward speed for the scouting. Sophie toward a keener head. Arya toward not breaking. None of which matters, Arya said, if the magic underneath it doesn't grow. And it doesn't. It goes up a hair a year. Everyone knows that. Everyone's wrong, I said. Or everyone's just never lived where I lived. And here, I gave them the thing that was actually mine to give, the last secret of my dead family, the only piece of them still walking around alive, which was me. In a place thick with magic, magic grows fast. Not a hair a year, a whole step in a handful of days. And there was one such place near enough to walk to, the Demon Forest. My mother took me in there the week I was born, I said. The wardens always trained inside it. It's why one family could hold this whole border when a night order couldn't. The forest everyone else runs from is the fastest way to get strong there is. Arya was already on her feet. She called it reckless. Monsters came out of that place. I was talking about walking the children straight into the thing that had nearly eaten us all 2 nights ago. Every word of it was fair. The monsters are only as strong as the magic around them, I said. Thin edge, weak monsters. We start at the edge. I pick the ground. I am never not there. I looked at her. I'm not my mother. She was reckless to the point of madness. I'm only reckless to the point of results. She still might have said no. She had the right to. I had already decided I would not take one child through those trees without her word, because they were hers before they were mine. And I watched her open her mouth to give me some careful reason to wait. Something sensible about spring and my land papers still not being filed. A lever she could have pulled to keep me tethered here on her terms. She closed it again. Somewhere in the last 2 days, she had learned not to manage me into staying. So instead, she just asked plainly whether I really meant to see it through with them. I said yes, and that from Arya was the whole of it. She had stopped holding the door shut against being left and started choosing the people on her side of it. She was not her family's exile anymore. She was ours. It was Sophie who turned her. She tugged Arya's sleeve and said in that small, flat voice that 2 nights ago, when the thing came, she could do nothing, that she had lain there with a whole regret filling her head. If only I'd learned more, if only I'd been stronger, and that she never wanted to feel that particular nothing again as long as she lived. Arya looked down at her for a long moment. All right, she said. We train, all of us, together. Leo whooped loud enough to shake dust off the new stone, and Sophie almost smiled, and I sat back and let the noise wash over me and thought, not for the first time, that I could not have done any of this over their objection, that the permission mattered more than the plan. Mira came back to us near dusk, up the stairs into the long hall where I was pacing out the training floor, her face washed and her eyes still swollen and her chin up. Carrie was a step behind her with a hand hovering at her back like you'd hold it near a candle. Mira did not make a speech. She is too well raised for speeches. She stopped in front of me and said that she would be the healer, that she would learn the body the way I had said, all of it, every wound and how it closed, so that the next time one of us bled in front of her, she would not stand there useless with the light in her hands and nothing to tell it. She said it like a woman signing her own name back onto something that had been taken off her. I know, I said. You already did it once today. The rest is just more of the same. She almost smiled. It was closer than it had been that morning. So that was the family, whole again in the last of the light, standing in a stone hall that had come up out of frozen dirt in one night. A chief who had stopped guarding the exit, a healer who had her worth back, a craftsman who had been told she counted, and 2 children aimed at the forest. A real party with a real shape. They did not know the half of what I was. They did not know about the storage that had carried their beds out in the dark. They did not know how far past a stone house my magic actually ran, or the mark on the inside of my wrist that was quietly spending my years. They were going to find all of it out, in time, in pieces, when they were strong enough that the knowing would not turn me into their whole world, not before. For now, they had a fortress the forest could throw its worst against, and each other, and a way to get strong that no one else in this kingdom remembered. It was a good start. It was not enough. Stone walls a thing can climb are only half a wall, and I had already begun to draw the other half, a real wall, all the way around, high enough and thick enough that the day something worse than a wolf came out of those trees, it would meet the outside of us and go no further. I would need more than my own 2 hands for that one. As it happened, the road was about to bring me exactly the sort of help I did not ask for. The fortress was only half a wall, and I knew it. Stone a wolf could climb was not a wall at all, and the real one, all the way around the village was already drawn behind my eyes. But a wall protects a thing, and the thing still had to be worth protecting. So before I raised a single stone, I took the family into the trees. The trick nobody in this kingdom seemed to remember was that you did not need to kill anything to get stronger. You just had to be there. The forest was thick with magic the way a river is thick with cold, and a body left standing in it long enough drank the stuff in whether it wanted to or not. A full day among these trees was worth about a point of raw magic to each of them. Slow, but it stacked. The catch was the things that lived in the same water. A gray wolf carried about 10 points of magic. My people carried 2 on a good morning. We were not there to fight. We were there to soak and to gather and to run if we had to. I handed Mira and Carrie a book before we set out. A squat thing bound in cracked hide. The letters inside a language that had been dead a long time. Learn the shapes first, I told them. The meaning comes after. Carrie turned it over, frowning at the spine. Where did you even get this? Somewhere old. I let the answer sit there, going nowhere, and after a moment she stopped waiting on it. I could read that tongue the way you read your own handwriting, without knowing how, and I had learned years ago that I could not teach the trick to anyone, so they would learn it the long way, and one day they would teach the others, and I would not have to be the only door the knowledge came through. We spread out under the branches. Leo went first, low and quick, body strengthening humming in his little legs, calling back the shape of the ground ahead. Mira laid a blessing over all of us, a soft light that pushed everyone's magic up by 1/10 and held it as long as her breath allowed. Carrie moved through the frost-picking leaf and root, her collection magic lifting each one out of the cold at the exact moment it was worth the most. Sophie trailed behind, wrapping our bags and bottles in reinforcement, since we had no proper gear to keep the harvest fresh. Arya carried the luggage, all of it. Body strengthening cinched tight through her shoulders, jaw set, hating every step of it. Shouldn't I be searching too? She said, hitching the pack higher. You are searching for the limit of what you can carry before your legs quit. I did feel a little bad about it. Not enough to take the pack. Weight was the fastest way to teach a body to stop breaking, and she needed that more than she needed a basket of herbs. We were maybe an hour in when Leo came back through the brush at a dead sprint, eyes huge. Gray wolf! There's a gray wolf coming! Nobody argued. We went home the way we came, fast and quiet, Arya's pack thudding against her spine the whole way, and behind us, the forest closed up like water over a dropped stone. Arya dropped the pack the second we were through the door, cut her strengthening, and folded onto the bench like something with the strings snipped. Carrie put water in front of her. I took the pack off the floor before Arya could look at it again. The harvest could not wait. Magic bleeds out of cut things the moment you stop paying attention, and by evening, those leaves would be just leaves. The value gone out of them, like heat out of a body. Sophie's reinforced bottles could hold it, though, could pinch the diffusion off and keep the magic where it was. Carrie, any magic left in you? She blinked. Right now, I think so. A little. I spread the cuttings across the table and picked up one broad green leaf. Watch, then you try. Extraction is a quiet magic. No flash, no bang. You reach into a material, find the one thread of attribute you want, and you pull it loose from everything else. I drew the earth out of that leaf and let it run into an old potion bottle, a fat drop of it, green and slow as honey. Earth essence. The leaf left behind was pale and ordinary, a dead thing now, its whole worth sitting in the glass. Like that. Now you. Carrie set her hands the way I had, breathed and said the word. Her drop came out thin and dull, a fraction of mine, more gray than green. She wilted. That's a first try, I said. Do it again. She did it again and again. By the 5th leaf, her color had deepened and her hands had stopped shaking, and then her magic ran dry mid-pull, and she sagged, and I finished the rest of the table myself. A little row of bottles when we were done, each one holding a swallow of green. To them, it was chores, a byproduct. Earth essence went into the ground to make things grow, plant food, nothing you would cross a room for. I did not correct them. I knew what those bottles were worth to the right buyer, and it was a great deal more than a garden. But a secret kept is a secret that cannot be taken, and there was no one here yet who needed to know. So I lined the bottles on the shelf and said nothing, and let the family think we had spent the morning making fertilizer. I told them the shape of the afternoon. Magic practice for everyone, in the open hall upstairs. The forest was too dangerous for drilling in, and raw magic was not the same as control, and control was the thing that kept you from tearing your own arm off. And while they practiced, I would put up the wall. Arya's head came up. You can just make a wall that easily. Watch from a window, not up close. Why not up close? Mira answered before I could, setting her cup down with the careful poise she wore like armor. Because he keeps things quiet for our sake, Arya, and you shouldn't make it hard on him. She said it gently, but there was something old under it. Magic knowledge is dangerous. Just knowing a thing can get you a knife in the dark. Believe me, my family bought the wrong knowledge once, and it cost us everything we had. Arya didn't push, but I watched her decide that a window was a very loose word, and that a window in the lookout tower was still a window, and I let her have it. Let her watch. It would do her good to want the thing badly enough to climb for it. I walked out to the moat alone and crouched by the near end of the drawbridge, and I put my hand flat on the frozen ground. Then I gave it everything the working needed. The earth answered. It started as a shudder under my palm, then a deep rolling shake that walked out through the whole ground at once, and stone came up out of it, not stacked, not laid, not built, grown. It rose straight out of the dirt in a single unbroken sheet, gray and seamless and taller than a man, and it did not stop where I stood. It ran. It chased the line of the moat, curling out to the left of me and away to the right at the same time, a wall pouring itself up from nothing along the whole ring of the village, faster than a person could have walked it, until the two ends of it came around the far side and met and closed. The shaking stopped, the dust drifted down, and where an open frontier settlement had stood a minute before, there was a walled town, ringed all the way round in one clean band of stone, the moat outside it and the fortress rising at its heart. I stood up on top of the new wall and looked at what I had made, and it was, I had to admit, a fairly serious wall. Somewhere behind me, a small voice shrieked my name. I turned. Up on the lookout tower, a tiny figure was leaning half out of the window, both arms going like a windmill, and I lifted a hand and waved back at Leo across the whole width of the village. From the tower, they had seen the whole thing. Leo was still yelling, waving both arms at the little figure standing on the wall in the distance. Sophie had called it first, the way she called everything, flat and certain. There, by the drawbridge. He's touching the ground. And then, a breath before it happened, it's starting. She did not flinch when the shaking came. She never did. Carrie had her hands pressed to the sill, half braced for the tower to come down. It did not come down. Rain built things that stayed. Arya said nothing at all. She watched the stone chase itself around the world below her, watched a wall swallow the whole horizon of her village in the time it took to catch a breath, and something worked in her face that was not quite awe and not quite hunger. She had been thrown out of a mage family for waking her magic a season too slowly. She had been told, in a room a great deal like the hall downstairs, exactly how much she was worth. And it had not been much. And here was a boy remaking the earth with one hand and waving up at a child while he did it. I have to get stronger, she said, low, mostly to herself. I have to be able to do more than this. Nobody answered her. There was nothing to say to it that would have helped. But Mira glanced at her sideways and did not look away as fast as she might have. Walking home along the inside of my own wall, I felt vaguely cheated. I had built the girls a home overnight, and half of them had barely blinked. I had ringed their entire world in stone and gotten one boy waving. Part of me wanted to go back and do something with more noise to it, something that would make them all shout. And the grown part of me that had died once already told the child part to grow up. If they ever asked me to show them something more impressive, I decided, I would just tell them to study harder. The wall was up, but a wall keeps big things out, not small, curious ones in. And I had 5 people under this roof now who had just watched me pull magic out of the air and were going to want to try it somewhere private, somewhere like the forest, alone, where a gray wolf carried 10 points of magic and they carried 2. So I walked the perimeter one more time and laid detection along the tree line, a quiet net of it, the kind that would wake me the moment one of them tried to slip out to train where I could not reach them in time. They would find it eventually and be annoyed. That was fine. Annoyed was a thing you could be while still breathing. It was, I thought, a good day's work. The village was fed, walled, and quietly making a green liquid worth more than any of them guessed, and the forest was ours to grow in on our own terms. We owed this kingdom nothing and needed it for less. For the first time, it felt less like hiding and more like holding ground. I did not yet know that ground this good does not stay unnoticed, that the very numbers that made us safe, the taxes we paid, the walls we had no legal right to raise, were at that moment sitting in a ledger on a desk a long way off, in front of someone whose whole job was to notice exactly the sort of thing we had become. I only heard the rest of it much later, and pieced it together the way you piece together a storm you slept through by the damage it left. But it began, as these things do, with paperwork. Margrave Alicia governed this stretch of the frontier, which meant that once a year every village on her border sent up its accounts, and once a year she read every line of them herself. She trusted no clerk with the counting. She had not clawed her way to a border seat as a woman in a kingdom that measured worth by magic alone, by trusting anyone with the counting. Her steward set the annual report at her elbow and withdrew, and she went down the columns with a dry, practiced patience, looking for the small lies that told her someone was skimming. Nothing was skimming. Everything, in fact, was strangely healthy, and near the bottom, her eye caught on one entry and stopped. The Pioneer Village, the one she had signed over to her sister's exiled daughter, a girl cast out over a talent. She woke a little too late, sent to reclaim a scrap of ground at the mouth of a monster forest because there was nowhere gentler to send her. Alicia had never expected the place to last a season. Pioneer villages at the edge of the demon forest almost never did. She called her steward back and asked how it was doing. He went to fetch the file and came back holding it wrong, pale around the mouth. "My lady," he could barely get it out. "The Pioneer Village. Something is very wrong." She read it herself. She read it twice. The village had been founded in the spring with 10 men and 10 women. There had been a monster attack, and after it, every surviving man had fled, and left behind 5 women and not one man among them. Legally, a village with no men could not own its land. Practically, 5 women at the throat of a monster forest should have been dead or scattered by now. They were neither. The ledger in her hand said this impossible, half-emptied, legally doomed little village had just paid some of the richest taxes on her entire border. And a separate note, added by a surveyor who plainly had not believed his own eyes, reported that the place had somehow raised a moat, a ring of matched stone wall, and a tall building at its center. 5 women, no men, and fortifications a garrison town would envy. Alicia set the paper down very carefully, the way you set down a thing that might be alive. Someone was in that village who could work magic on a scale that should not exist out here, and her niece was sitting in the middle of it. A mage that strong was either a miracle or a threat, and in her experience, the two wore the same coat until you got close enough to see the buttons. "It seems," she said, "that I need to make an inspection." Her steward started to say something about the season. She was already ahead of him. The snows were close, and once they came, the frontier roads closed for months, and she had no intention of spending a winter wondering who had built a fortress on her border behind her back. "Before it snows," she said, rising, "hurry the preparations. We leave as soon as the horses are ready." And so, while I set my little snares along the tree line and worried about nothing worse than a curious child slipping out to practice, the help I had not asked for was already calling for its horses. The way I heard it, months after, and always secondhand, the men who threw me away spent one very bad morning trying to get me back. I wasn't there. I want that clear. Everything I'm about to tell you came to me the slow way, in pieces, off the road and out of other people's mouths, and I put it together the way you put together a story that happened to someone else. But I've turned it over enough times now that I can see the room. So let me tell it the way I see it. The news reached the capital before I did anything at all. The night order they had sent to hold my border in my place was gone. Not beaten, not scattered. Gone. And then, a day behind that, the worst report. The Central Army had marched up behind the knights to steady the line. Gone in blind without anyone who actually knew where the forest bit hardest, and been mauled so badly that the true count never made it onto the public ledgers. I'm told the council chamber went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when every man in it has just done the same arithmetic and none of them wants to say the total out loud. They had never seen the border. That was the thing. Not one man in that chamber had ever stood at the tree line at the hour the forest wakes and watched it come out. They knew the warden as a line in a ledger, 100 silver, paid monthly, to a family name they found embarrassing. They did it didn't know the line meant a boy standing alone in the dark, deciding which of the things pouring out of the trees would reach the villages behind him and which of them wouldn't. You can strike a line in a ledger with a stroke of the pen and a smile. What they'd actually struck out took a few weeks to show them the difference, and it showed them in dead nights. For years, they had paid one boy 100 silver a month to stand between them and the demon forest, and they had called it generous. They had abolished the whole office of demon warden in an afternoon, to a hall full of applause, because it made the king look modern and unafraid of old superstitions. Now the applause was over and the border was open, and the arithmetic on the table said, in plain numbers, exactly what that one boy had been worth. The king moved fast, I'll give him that. He didn't argue. He ordered it done that same morning. The former demon warden was to be found and reinstated at once, all privileges restored and lifted to a rank standing level with a duke. Not a bribe, his ministers were careful to call it. A correction. Bring him home, give him back everything and then some, and let the border close behind him again like a door. And here, the story stops being something I merely heard and becomes something I think I can actually see. For one breath, alone inside the order he had just given, the king understood precisely what he had done. He had signed away the only man holding his kingdom together to win a moment of looking clever, and the cleverness had lasted exactly as long as the border did. He had a son of the realm's blood, standing on a frontier for 100 silver, and he had let a room full of nobles laugh that boy off the map. The regret went all the way down, cold and complete. Then it passed, because a king cannot afford to keep a thing like that, and he asked when the warden would arrive. That was when the home minister had to speak, and the whole morning came apart. The warden could not be summoned, the minister said, because the warden did not exist. On the day of the engagement party, the boy had been struck from the Ashford family. His name had been taken from him. He had been disowned, put out, and he had left the capital that same day, and no one had bothered to write down where a disowned barbarian went. There was no one to send for. The man the king had just raised to the rank of a duke had, weeks ago, been declared no one's son and no one at all. I'm told the king asked more than once why this was happening. No one had a good answer, because the answer was him. They spent the rest of that morning on the same problem from every side, and every side handed back the same shape. You cannot summon a man you have unmade. You cannot pay a debt to someone whose name you helped burn off a scroll. The correction they'd ordered so briskly, all privileges restored, the rank of a duke, the door held wide, arrived at an empty room. I was already gone, already north, already someone else's, and all that generosity landed in the dust where a sun used to stand, and there was a smaller, uglier truth folded into it. One the home minister put as quietly as he could. The crown had never even known I was disowned. A whole family had struck a son out of its blood on the very day the king was making a public show of honoring that family, and the news had never climbed the palace steps. The men who ran the kingdom had lost track of the one person the kingdom could not do without, and they only went looking for him on the morning they'd already lost him twice. It got worse from there, in the small, grinding way that court problems get worse. There was still the land. When the king had abolished the wardens, he'd handed my father a scrap of frontier as a parting reward, a piece of ground so raw and so close to the demon forest that the ministers privately agreed it would take 100 years to make anything of it. It had been a punishment dressed as a gift, and everyone in the room had known it, but it had been given publicly as a reward in front of the whole court. And a crown that takes back a reward the moment it becomes inconvenient is a crown no one trusts a reward from again. The military minister wanted to pull the front line back from the forest entirely, now that there was no warden to hold it, which meant abandoning that frontier ground anyway. The finance minister said what everyone was thinking, that a mistake should be corrected quickly and quietly before it cost anything more. So they found the clever solution, the way clever men in a hurry always do. They would not take the worthless land back. That would shame the crown. Instead, they would offer the Ashford family an exchange. Give up the raw frontier, accept in trade an equal area of settled state land somewhere safer, and call it a courtesy. Everyone saves face. The line pulls back. The books close. Nobody in that room did the second piece of arithmetic until it was already signed. Equal area. They had matched the size of the land, and no one had thought hard about which land. When the trade went through, the piece of settled ground that happened to match the acreage was the whole southern granary, the fields that fed a third of the kingdom and paid a fat share of its taxes. In one stroke, to tidy away the embarrassment of a boy they'd exiled, the crown handed a private family the region that kept it fed and gutted its own income doing it. The finance minister worked the numbers twice, I'm told, because the first time he didn't believe them. A third of the realm's bread, and a river of tax with it, signed over to a private house to spare the crown a single moment's blush. It would take years to feel the full weight of what they'd done, but the hole opened that morning, in a quiet room, over a piece of paper, and everything the kingdom tried to do afterward, it did a little poorer than the day before. They had thrown me out for costing them 100 silver a month. Fixing the shame of it cost them a granary. I didn't know any of that yet. I was, at that hour, a long way north, worrying about a wall and a curious child, and the kingdom I used to hold was quietly picking its own pocket to feel better about my name. My father, meanwhile, went to look at what he'd won. I want to be honest about this part because I've been asked how it felt and I never have a good answer. This is the man who beat me on the day they took the family name away. The man who stepped over the fact of me the way you step over a puddle. He'd skipped my mother's funeral. He'd looked at me on the worst day of my life to that point and told me plainly that I was not his child. So I'll tell you what happened to him without dressing it up, and you can decide for yourself how to feel because I'm still deciding. He rode out to inspect his new territory before the trade to the granary went through, sure that he'd been cheated, and equally sure he could squeeze a profit out of anything. The land was worse than the reports. One thin town, put there only to watch the forest. A scatter of hard, silent people who'd learned to live within a day's walk of monsters. Nothing worth a nobleman's boots. I keep coming back to how sure he was. This was a man who had looked at his own son and found nothing worth keeping. And now he looked at a whole frontier of people who had survived what would have killed him in a night and found the same nothing. He'd said it to my face once, flat, in front of the family, that I was not his child. He'd handed me a barbarian's name and 100 silvers worth of contempt and thought the matter closed. Standing on that raw ground, he was still working the only sum he'd ever known, dividing the world into people worth his notice and people who existed to be squeezed. And he had put every soul on that border, me among them, on the wrong side of the line. The way it came back to me, he wasn't discouraged. He decided the ragged locals were simply hiding their money, evading taxes the way lowly people always did, and he told the men around him that starting the very next day, they would go through this place and squeeze out every last coin it had. He was already annoyed he'd brought his wife along to see something so beneath them. He was planning the ride home. He was, right up to the end, entirely certain that the danger of this border was somebody else's problem, some barbarian's problem, a thing that got handled far away so that men like him never had to picture it. Then, on the road, the roar came up out of the tree line. A knight reached the carriage first, shouting that a horde was coming, a wall of monsters pouring out of the forest and closing on the road with nothing in front of it to slow them down. Nothing. That was the whole point, wasn't it? For years, there had been a boy in front of it. Now there was a count in a carriage who thought the forest was a rumor for lesser men. And here, one more time, I let myself see it because I've never been able to leave it alone. In the last moment, when the shape of it finally reached even him, my father's mind did the only thing it had ever known how to do. It went looking for someone lower than himself to blame, someone who should have handled this, someone whose job it was to stand out here in the cold so that he would never have to. He was still reaching for that person, still certain such a person existed and had failed him. At the moment, there was no more time to reach for anyone at all. I'm not going to describe what came next, because there's nothing in it worth carrying. The horde reached the road. The carriage was found afterward. My father did not survive the land he'd been so pleased to finally own, and neither did the men who'd ridden out to help him tax it. The monsters he had dismissed his whole life as a barbarian's chore came out of the trees and settled the account. On ground the crown had handed him as a joke. On a border, no one was holding anymore. There's a version of this where I'm supposed to have wished it on him, out there on my border in the cold. And I won't pretend the thought never crossed a younger mind. But wishing takes wanting, and I'd spent everything I had learning not to want a single thing from that family years before the forest ever reached his carriage. He didn't die because I hated him. He died because he was certain the wall between the kingdom and the dark kept itself, that it was free, that it was beneath him, and because the wall had a name and they'd struck it off a scroll. The forest didn't care about any of that. It came the way it always came. It just, this one time, had no one standing in front of it. The man who told me I was not his child died on the exact kind of land I'd spent my whole childhood keeping the rest of them safe from. I've turned that over 100 times. I keep waiting to feel the thing I'm supposed to feel. Mostly, I feel the cold of that road, secondhand, and a quiet I can't quite name. Word of all of it came to me the way weather comes to a valley, slowly, from over the ridge, already half spent. It arrived as rumor, up the road with a traveler, and then along the market talk, thinned and reshaped every time it changed mouths. The wardens undone, a night order swallowed whole, a border gone open, a great house up country buried in grain it couldn't hold, and a crown quietly poorer than it had been. And, threaded through it small, a count eaten on a frontier road, and a king who'd tried and failed to call some vanished boy home. I was at the workshop table when the last piece of it reached me, sorting the day's work, and I listened to the whole thing the way you listen to a storm you're safely indoors for. I waited for it to land. It didn't. There was no lift in it, no heat, none of the satisfaction I might have promised a younger version of myself. A man I used to belong to was dead, and a throne I used to hold up was on its knees. And I found I was mostly thinking about whether the stew had enough salt. That's the truth of it, and I've stopped apologizing for it. I never wanted the crown to fall. I never spent a single night out on that border dreaming of the day they'd come crawling to beg me back. That was never the wound. The wound was only ever that no one chose me. Duty chose me, and blood used me, and a kingdom paid me 100 silver a month to be useful, and never once asked if I was cold. The day they told me I was not their child, the only honest thing in me was relief. So the news that they wanted me back after all changed nothing, because there was nothing in it for the part of me it was supposed to reach. Let them look for the warden. The warden had a name struck off a family scroll and a life already built somewhere else. I stood there in the warm and tried, honestly, to feel it for the boy on the luggage cart, the one who would once have given a year of his life to hear a king say the words "come home." I couldn't find him. Somewhere between that cart and this table, he'd stopped waiting to be sent for. These 5 had done that to me, without ever once knowing they were doing it, just by needing me at a table and being glad when I sat down. Arya caught the change in me before I said a word, the way she always does. She stopped stacking bottles and asked what was wrong, blunt as a dropped stone. "Nothing's wrong," I told her. "Something up the road just finished being somebody else's problem." "That's not an answer," she said, and folded her arms and waited. Red hair catching the hearthlight. Carrie hovered at the edge of it, a full crate against her hip, worried the way she gets worried. I didn't give either of them the whole shape of it. What good would the capital's ruin do these two, who'd been thrown away by that same world for the crime of being late or being poor? Instead, I told them the only part that mattered here. "The kingdom out there is going to have a hard winter," I said. "So we're going to make sure this place doesn't need it for anything. Not its grain, not its coin, not its knights, nothing." Arya's chin came up at that. She'd been cast out of her own name, weighed by a mage family and found wanting, and I watched the word independence land in her like a coal. She didn't smile. She just nodded once, the way she nods when she's decided to work harder than is good for her. I meant it plainer than they knew. I put more hours into what I was teaching them, drilling the shapes of the old magic into Carrie and Mira until they could hand it down without me, pushing the family's own small store of power up a little further every day. I studied the parts of it I'd never had a proper book for, the way a spell can be held half-finished and made to tell you what it still needs, and I folded what I learned back into their lessons. I turned the workshop's output over in my head as coin and stores and walls, never chores. I checked the moat, checked the wall I'd raised, and started laying out in my mind exactly what it would take to arm this place properly, so that when the world outside finally came apart, the pieces of it would break against stone and go around us. I didn't say the rest of it out loud, that a kingdom coming apart makes its neighbors hungry, that a granary in the wrong hands makes desperate men do desperate math, that walls only ever matter on the day someone finally tries them. I just started building toward it. More stores in the cellars, more of the old shapes in the girls' hands, a harder edge on everything we made. If the world out there was going to teach itself the slow and stupid way, that the people it discards are the ones holding it up, then it could learn the lesson against my stone. So I let the news pass. I let the king beg an empty road, and I let my father lie on the ground he'd been so proud to finally own. And I lifted the crate out of Carrie's arms because it was too heavy for her and set it on the table where it belonged. That was the whole of my revenge, if you even want to call it that. I was busy. I had people now. The kingdom could fall at whatever pace it liked, and I was not going to look up from the work to watch it go. The kingdom that discarded me was begging and broke, and the father who beat me was dead, and I stood in a warm room full of people who'd chosen to stay, and let all of it pass over me like a cloud shadow crossing a field I no longer farmed for anyone but us. It didn't end there, of course. A thing like a granary changing hands doesn't stay quiet, and a border with no one holding it doesn't heal, it spreads. The crown's trouble was going to come looking for somewhere strong to lean on, And I was, right at that hour, still thinking small, still picturing nothing worse than a hard winter and a locked door. Because while I stood there feeling almost nothing about the fall of everything I used to carry, the help I hadn't asked for was already on the road to my gate, and it had questions about the walls. The help I hadn't asked for announced itself a little before noon, shouting across my moat. A lightly armed man stood on the far bank with his hands cupped, calling that the frontier margrave, Alicia, would reach us within half a day for an inspection, and that we should make ready. Then he turned his horse and was gone. The way a man leaves who has other villages to frighten before dark. Arya went still at the name. Not afraid, exactly. Something quieter and older than fear. She moved fast after that. Training was off, she said. Get the little ones out of sight. She wanted me and the 3 youngest in the workshop out of the way, while she and Mira met the woman at the door. I told her I could put it all back, sink the walls, fill the moat, hand the margrave a plain poor village with nothing worth a second look. Give me an hour. Mira shook her head before Arya could. No, the messenger already saw it, she said, folding her hands. If any of it changes between now and midday, they'll know we hid something, and then they'll want to know what. She was right, and I hated that she was right. A wall you can't take down in time is just a confession you built too well. Arya told me the margrave was a good person, that I should leave it to her. I believed the first part less than she did, and the second part not at all. But I went where I was put. It was becoming a habit, going where I was put. I'd only stopped letting it decide anything. So I sat in the workshop with the 3 youngest and listened to a noblewoman arrive through a stone wall. Leo pressed an ear to the boards and gave a whispered report on every horse. Sophie sat with a book she wasn't reading. Carrie kept lining up bottles that were already in line. The room had been the girls' room once, before a bad night sent all 6 of us into one room to sleep, and none of us ever quite moved back out. Now, it was where the work lived. Crates and pouches and small green bottles of the stuff we pulled out of the forest's leavings. Through the wall, I heard Arya greet her, Margrave Alicia. That was the whole of it, not Aunt. The woman said something warm back, and I caught the shape of an old fondness in it, an offer to be called by the family name. Arya closed the door on it with 2 flat words and a title. I hadn't known. Nobody had told me the chief of a village of cast-offs was herself a cast-off, and that the shrewd noble now standing in her front room was the blood that had thrown her out. But you could hear the whole story in the one word she wouldn't say. It told me why the walls had frightened her instead of comforting her, and why she wanted this over fast. When the people who unmade you come to admire what you built, you don't feel safe. You feel found. The door opened. Arya's face was set. The margrave, she said, wanted to meet the magician who raised her walls. She looked at me the way you look at a lock that opened too easily. I gave her a boy. That was the plan. And it wasn't hard, because a boy was most of what she'd expected and all of what she wanted to see. I bowed the right amount, said my name was Rain, said it was an honor, and let her weigh me and come up light. Modest power, she'd be thinking. Some knack for stonework. Nothing a woman who could put fire through a wall needed to lose sleep over. I let her keep every piece of that. Arya asked, careful and formal, whether the margrave would permit me to settle in the village for good. Alicia said yes without a blink, and offered to see to the paperwork herself. My registration, my standing, all of it handled through her office. A kindness. Also a hand closing, gently, around the one loose thread the village had. I thanked her for it, and meant the thanks, and watched the hand close anyway. Then Arya brought out the trade. Magic stones first, a heap of them, and among them one the size of 2 fists that had come out of something that had very nearly killed all of them once. The steward's eyes went wide. That was the show. And then, small in Arya's palm, the thing I'd told her to bring. A single clean vial of the green essence we'd been bottling out of the earth attribute leavings and stacking in a crate like it was nothing. The margrave stopped. I want to be honest about that moment, because it's the one that changed everything, and none of us in that room felt it turn. I knew what the vial was worth. I'm the one who told Arya to set it on the table. What I hadn't seen yet was what it would do to a noblewoman's face. She went from polite to still to careful in the space of a breath. And careful was the frightening one. She turned the little bottle to the light and named it plainly. A strategic material, she said. The thing that mends enchanted armor and enchanted blades when nothing else will. And one vial this clean was worth a whole house in the capital. She'd buy it herself, since she couldn't judge the purity out here. She said all of it lightly. Her hands weren't light at all. You don't watch a frontier lord's hands go slow and exact over a thing unless it's the kind of thing wars are fought with. And you don't buy war metal off a wall unless there's a war coming to spend it on. She did the next sum too. I watched her do it. A vial like this doesn't fall out of the sky. It comes from a place, and a place that makes it is a place worth having. She'd walked in to inspect a poor pioneer village with a suspicious wall. She was walking out having found a well. She was gracious about the rest. She'd brought settler men with her, I gathered, bodies to fill out a village short of them, and she quietly decided to take them home again rather than crowd the boy who'd just turned dirt into gold in front of her. Better to keep me content than to keep me watched by strangers. And she told her steward, Lo, to keep a close eye on this place from now on. She meant it kindly. Protection and possession are the same grip. They only tell you different stories about the hand. We stood on the bridge and watched the carriages get small. Mira worked it out before the dust had settled. She came to give us men, she said, quiet, her eyes on the road. She saw what you can make and decided the men were worth less than staying on your good side. So she took them back and left us alone. She glanced at me, that small knowing look she has. She'd rather have you owing her nothing than owing her strangers. Arya only looked glad to be left with the people she already had. I let her have that. I didn't tell either of them the rest because I was still building it myself, and it took me weeks to finish. It came the way news comes to a valley, slow and thinned, that the kingdom we'd landed in, Aurelia, had a sick eldest prince, and 2 more circling the throne behind him, and that lords like Alicia were already choosing which one to bleed for. A war gathering the way weather gathers, and a war eats exactly the green stuff we'd been treating as workshop sludge. Every mended blade and patched suit of armor drinking it down. That was the thing I carried back through my own gate that afternoon and didn't set down. For a whole season, this walled quiet had been invisible, too poor and too far and too full of the wrong people to matter to anyone. It wasn't invisible now. A noblewoman had seen the well, and noblewomen talk, and wars go looking for wells. I couldn't unbuild the wall. I couldn't unsay the vial. The only thing left in my hands was the people inside these walls, and whether, when someone finally came for the well, they could do anything but die politely around it. So I decided to make them able to fight. They were already waiting for me, all 5 of them, buzzing, because I'd promised them days ago that we'd learn to fight the things we'd only ever run from. I brought out the gear I'd been quietly putting by for exactly this. To them, it looked like more of my ordinary magic, a man reaching behind himself and coming back with his arms full, and I let it look like that. There were things about how I carried what I carried that the family didn't need to know yet. Leo first, because he'd have combusted if he went last. I put a short blade in his hands, and before he'd finished cheering, I told him what it was for. His job wasn't to kill anything. His job was to be fast and loud, and everywhere the wolves didn't want him, to pull their eyes off the others and never quite be where their teeth closed. Distraction, not slaughter. He deflated for about 1 breath, because he'd wanted to be the one cutting monsters to ribbons. Then he decided being the fastest thing in the forest was better anyway, and he was bouncing again. Then Arya, and I braced for this one, armor. A small round shield, a one-handed sword. She lit up at the sword, and I could see her already swinging it at imaginary wolves. So I said the hard part quickly. She wasn't the one who charged in. She was the one who stood between the wolves and everyone else, and did not move. Protector, the wall. I'll cut them down with this, she said, hefting the blade, grinning. You'll hold the line with that. I tapped the shield. In the trees, no one can shoot past you if you're off chasing a kill. Someone has to stand where the teeth come. That isn't a foot soldier's job, it's the chief's. She opened her mouth to argue, and I watched the word chief do the work the shield couldn't. She closed it again. Then she pulled the whole rig on with a fierceness that told me she'd hold that line until it killed her, which was the one part of it I didn't love. I mentioned, mildly, that the sword wasn't sturdy, and she'd have to mend it with magic after every fight. She took that as a gift. Of course she did. It meant more magic. Carrie caught Mira's eye, and the 2 of them let out a breath they'd been holding since the armor came out. They'd expected a long fight to talk Arya down off the front line. So had I. 1 word had done it. I filed that away, the way you file the thing that worked. The rest of them got what suited them, whether or not it was what they'd have asked for. Sophie's was a staff taller than she was, worked to push her magic harder than her small body could push it alone. She'd stand at the back and put water through the wolves from range, and I told her to practice landing it clean, that I'd teach her the trick of it later. She wrapped both hands around the shaft and gripped it like I might change my mind. Carrie, I gave a crossbow, and she turned it over, asking what it was, which was fair because nobody looks at Carrie and thinks archer. It wasn't for killing. The bolts were tipped to numb and slow a thing, support, and nothing more. Her real weight was the gathering belt that came with it, a wide thing, all pockets, so she could strip the forest clean while the rest of us fought. Then I handed her the glasses. She put them on and nearly sat down in the dirt. Everyone was glowing, she said. She could see the light coming off all of us. off the herbs, off the stones. The lenses show the mana in living things, which turns finding what's worth picking into a matter of just looking. I'd held them back on purpose until her own earth mana was strong enough that the small drain they cost wouldn't cost her anything that mattered. She wasn't listening to that part. She was too busy staring at a world lit up from the inside. I let her. She'd earned a toy. Mira looked at the staff going to a child and asked, "Level, why hers was only a pendant on a cord?" "Because both your hands stay empty," I told her. "Healing done right takes two. One hand to pour it in, one to read the wound and tell the first hand what it's mending." A staff would cost her a hand she couldn't spare. In a fight, she'd hold the blessing over all of us. After it, she'd mend whatever we came home wearing and get better at it every single time she did. She closed her fist around the little focus and nodded once, and I believed her. The sweet one had the crossbow. The fierce one had the shield. The quiet one held the biggest weapon in the yard. None of it was arranged the way a story would have arranged it, and all of it was arranged the way that would keep them breathing. "Tomorrow," I told them, "we stop running from gray wolves. We take one down." 5 faces lit at once, and for a moment the war I could feel coming stood a little further off. I'd given them a wall. Now I was giving them teeth, because the world had spent one whole season not knowing this door was here, and today, across my own moat, it had finally come and knocked. I'd given them a wall. That morning, I gave them the field. I picked the clearing on purpose. The demon forest feeds its monsters, thick with mana under the trees, and a gray wolf that lives in it runs faster there, hits harder, thinks a step quicker. Out in the open, the ground goes quiet and the advantage bleeds off it. So I put the fight where I wanted it, not where the wolf did. I set them in a line. Arya at the front behind her shield, boots planted, sword held low. Sophie a few steps back with the staff that stood taller than she did, already breathing the slow way I'd drilled into her. Carry off on the flank with the crossbow up and a numbing bolt seated. Mira behind all of them, one hand closed around the pendant at her throat. "Leo," I said, "go get us one." He was gone before I finished the word, a brown streak into the trees, grinning like this was the best day of his short life. Carrie's bolt hand wasn't steady. "He's out there alone," she said, not taking her eyes off the tree line. "He's faster than anything in that forest." And he was. What I didn't tell her, what I never told any of them, was that I'd already found him. A thread of detection magic ran out past the trees and sat on Leo like a hand on a shoulder, and a second thread rode the wolf coming up behind him. I could feel the exact gap between them, pace by pace. If it closed too fast, I'd move. It wasn't going to close too fast, but I kept the net out anyway, quiet, the way I kept most things quiet. Then I felt Leo turn for home with the wolf locked in dead behind him, spacing it perfect, like he'd done it 100 times before. That snagged on something. A boy shouldn't be that good at being chased. I filed it away to ask him about later, in the tone that makes a child confess things. "Here they come," I said. "Hold your places." Leo broke from the trees at a dead sprint. The gray wolf came out a breath behind him. Gray slab of muscle, low to the ground, eating the distance between them. It was bigger up close than any of them had let themselves picture, and I watched Carrie's face go white and stay pointed straight down the bolt anyway. "Do as we practiced," Arya shouted, and set her feet. Leo didn't slow. He ran flat at Arya, and then he vaulted her, planted one hand on the rim of her shield, and went clean over her head. "Not there," she yelped. Then the wolf hit her. Her sword came up and around, missed. The wolf poured past the edge of the blade the way water goes around a stone. She swung again, missed again, and every muscle I had wanted to step in and end it for her. I didn't. "Water ball," Sophie's voice, flat and certain. A fist of water cracked into the wolf's flank and knocked it sideways, staggering, claws scrabbling on the frozen ground. It found its feet fast, and it did not go back at Arya. It bolted past her, straight at the small girl holding the staff. That was the moment the whole plan lived or died. Leo got there first. He came down off his vault already moving, knife low, and drove it into the wolf's left eye. The thing screamed and wrenched sideways, and turned its good side square into Carrie's line. She did not hesitate. I will give her that for the rest of my life. The crossbow snapped and the bolt took the wolf's right eye clean. Blind now, staggering, snapping at nothing, its head swinging on air. This is the finishing blow. Sophie again, both small hands wrapped white on the staff. Water ball. The second one landed like a dropped anvil. The wolf went down and did not get up, and before it finished falling, its body was already coming apart into light, folding down and down until there was nothing left in the frost but a single dark magic stone, steaming faintly in the cold air. Silence. 6 of us breathing. Then Arya walked over, crouched, and picked the stone up like it might still bite her. She turned it once in her fingers, and her whole face broke open. We did it, barely a sound. then not quiet at all. "We did it! We beat a monster! In the demon forest too!" They hit each other like a wave. All 5 of them. Leo shrieking, Carrie laughing behind both hands, Mira dragged into the middle of it with her pendant still clutched in one fist. Sophie stood very straight and let herself be hugged and did not smile, which for Sophie was the same as beaming. I stayed where I was, back at the tree line, hands tucked in my sleeves. I hadn't lifted a finger the whole time. That was the entire point of the morning. The sweet one had put a bolt through its eye. The quiet one had put it in the ground. The fierce one had stood exactly where the teeth came looking and held her spot. Not one piece of it had happened the way a story would have arranged it, and every piece of it had worked. "Rest," I called over. "We're going home." "We can still fight, Big Brother Rain." Leo, of course, bouncing. "5 of you barely put down one wolf." I said it plain, because it was true, and because a first win is the most dangerous thing a young fighter can carry out of a forest. "Save your legs for the walk. We'll hunt again after lunch." The promise of more was enough. It always is at that age. The walk back was worse than the fight. We were half a mile out when I felt the first shapes turn toward us through the trees. Then more. By the time the gate came into view, we were most of the way to a run, and Arya was cursing under her breath the whole distance, because Arya had kept the stone. "It's worth money," she gasped, once we were across the drawbridge and safe. "One of these is worth a lot, you know that? A magic stone is a lump of pure mana," I said. "Every monster for a mile can smell it. You didn't carry treasure home, you carried bait." She had the decency to look ill about it. She also, I noticed, did not put the stone down. That was the first lesson. Here was the second. I hauled out a crate of the earth attribute components I'd been shaping in the workshop and set it down in the middle of the yard. "Every fight, every time. You repair your gear before you rest," I said. "A sword that snaps mid-swing gets you killed. A shield with a crack in it gets you killed. You don't wait for a thing to fail. You mend it while it's small." Arya held up her shield. A few bright scratches raked across the face of it. Leo's dagger was worse. It was bent. He'd been cutting branches with it and stabbing eyes with it, and generally treating a blade like a stick you could find again in the morning. "Didn't it feel strange, swinging that?" I asked him. "I got used to it," he said, cheerful, like that settled the matter. I handed the dagger to Carrie instead. "You're up." Her head came around. "Eh? Me? I taught you the shape of it yesterday. Equipment repair. Nice and slow." She took a breath, laid the bent blade flat across both palms, and spoke the words. Component dust lifted off the crate and sank into the steel, and the bend eased itself straight, the scratches filling in from the bottom like water finding its level, until the thing looked like it had never left the forge. "Whoa!" Leo snatched it back. "Thanks, big sis Carrie." "Stop there," I told her, before she reached for the next piece. "Feel how it drank more dust the closer it got to perfect? That last little polish costs the most and matters the least. Mend it to strong. Leave the mirror shine. Do it that way, and you'll get twice the work out of the same crate." She nodded, already turning toward Arya's shield, and I watched something quiet settle into her hands, the particular calm of a person who has just found the thing she is good at. Sophie was waiting for me by the time Carrie moved down the line. She tugged my sleeve and did not quite look up. "My first 2 shots missed," she said. Not a question, an accusation, aimed square at herself. I crouched to her level. "Because you aimed with your eyes. Your eyes only see the wolf's surface, so the magic stops at the surface and slides right off. You have to aim with your magic sense. Feel the whole animal at once, not just the shape of it. Then the spell takes all of it." I let that sit. "Your 3rd shot did that. That's the one that dropped him." She frowned, working the idea like a knot in a string. "It's hard to feel and see at the same time." "It is. I got it wrong for a long while too, once." I left out where I'd learned the difference, and who had stood over me until I did, and what it had cost her to teach it. Some things the family didn't need yet. "You're quicker than I ever was. You'll have it inside a week." She thought about that, gave one small nod, and went to get her staff mended. We hunted 3 more times over the following days, and everyone went cleaner than the last. By the 3rd, they were good enough to finish early and walk home in daylight, no stones in anyone's pockets. The children came back each evening burned down to the wick. Arya and Leo and Sophie, asleep almost before their dinner was cold, and Mira with them, still not used to spending her mana out on the field the whole day long, which left me and Carrie awake in the dining hall, a lamp between us, and 2 books open. She was the one who broke the quiet. "Rain, can I ask you something?" A beat, gathering it. "I want to make a magic tool." I set my book down. "I'm bad at fine work, but I can teach you the simple things." "You're bad at cooking too," she said, and smiled when I had nothing to answer that with. She wanted to make a water stone. She dug it out of the old book, a little thing anyone could hold and pour mana into and draw clean water from, so nobody had to haul buckets from the well anymore. "The materials are all plants," she said, tapping the page. "They grow right out in the forest. forest. They do, I agreed. And the pot? She blinked. A normal pot? An alchemy pot. It renders the plants down into the liquid you actually build with. A cooking pot just gives you soup. I thought it over. I had only the one, a small alchemy pot I'd carried a long, long way. I slid it across the table to her anyway. Take mine to start. Come spring, when the road's open, we'll find a broken one in town and you'll mend it yourself. You'll have repair magic by then, easily. She took the pot in both hands like it was blown from eggshell, and her face, I caught it then, in the lamplight. Under the thank you, there was something pulled tight, something troubled, and it did not belong on a girl who'd just been handed a gift. I didn't push it, but I marked it. Marked? I found out what was troubling her a few days later. You feel like you weren't any use out there, I said. Not really a question. She didn't deny it. I can't hide anything from you. Her hands went still on the workbench. In the fight, I kept thinking, they'd have managed without me. Arya holds the line. Sophie ends it. Leo's the fast one. I just stand at the back and wait. You put a bolt through a wolf's eye while it was deciding whether to eat Sophie, I said. Keeping the gear whole, gathering what we need to live, that isn't nothing. That's half the reason none of us have died yet. I know. She looked down at her hands. But I can't beat a monster on my own. And there it was. I understood then what she'd really been reading for in that book. Not the water tools, the golems. An alchemist's way of setting something on the field that fights in her place. She wanted teeth of her own. I could have told her to stay in the support line where it was safe, where I'd put her precisely because it was safe. Part of me wanted to. Instead, I said, all right, we'll move your crafting up the list. You'll need it eventually anyway. It's not a detour. Her whole face lit at once, so bright and so sudden that for a second she was just Leo with longer hair. Thank you, Rain. 3 days. That was all it took her. 3 days. And she set a finished water stone in my palm. A smooth gray stone that woke cool and damp at a trickle of mana. Clean water beating out of nothing at all. It had taken me 3 years to learn to make the same thing. I turned it over and kept my face flat in thought, not for the first time, that I had gathered up a handful of people the world had thrown out as worthless. And every single one of them was quietly better than the world would ever bother to believe. Arya turned it over next, delighted. This is really useful, Carrie, but it's nothing like the magic tools I know, because nobody makes the stone, Mira said, taking it from her. She'd grown up around city artisans. She would know. In the capital, they only shape a stone that already exists, fit a handle, a spout, carve a name on it. I never once heard of anyone making the stone itself. A small hand tugged my sleeve. Sophie, her own book hugged to her chest, looking up. I want an alchemy pot too. You will, I told her, and put my hand on her head. In spring, because spring was the soonest anything happened now. The first snow had come down while Carrie worked, and out past our walls it was already banking deep. The capital was a month away by carriage in fair weather, and there would be no fair weather for 3 months. We were sealed in with what we had and nothing more, which meant that when the thaw finally came, we were going to need money. Real money. The kind that buys pots and materials and everything a growing village burns through faster than it can earn. I sat in the warm workshop with a water stone that should not exist trickling in my hand, and past the shuttered window, I could still feel the rest of it out there, waiting under the snow. The war I knew was coming. The noblewoman who had walked into our valley and found a well. The wide world that finally knew our door was here. Snow first, then money, then whatever was walking toward us across all of it. Sophie leaned her whole small weight into my hand and shut her eyes, and I let the thought wait a while longer. Hey, Arya, got a minute? She looked up from the ledger like I'd caught her at something. I'd only come to ask whether we had the coin for a second alchemy pot. Sophie had asked for one, and I meant to keep the promise. Arya closed the book and said nothing, and across the table, Carrie and Mira went still. That told me more than the ledger would have. The truth is, Arya said at last, the only cash we have is what the Margrave paid us the other day for the magic stones. That's it. I waited. It came out of her in pieces, and every piece cost her something. The young ones who'd run off in the autumn, before I ever fell out of the sky into this valley, hadn't just left. They'd taken the money on their way out. All of it. And to be thorough about it, she said, her voice going flat, they'd stripped the place of anything that could be sold, the farm tools included. So what's the plan? I asked. Do we even have a way to get tools before spring? The silence answered that too. People fled these frontier settlements sometimes. It happened. What I hadn't done was the math on what it left behind. And now I did it fast, and I didn't like the sum. No tools meant no plowing. And out here, plowing wasn't just turning dirt. It was a ritual, the thing that actually claimed the land. You broke the ground with a hoe, and the land's magic learned what it was meant to grow. Skip it, and the wheat wouldn't take. The weeds would. And a pioneer village that couldn't farm was a village the Margrave could quietly take back. Arya's jaw was tight. Is there no way to plow the fields with magic? No, I said. Believe me, I've tried. I told her the truth of it, because she needed to stop hoping in that direction. The ritual part of plowing drank mana like a bottomless cup. I'd once spent 3 hours turning a single field with magic, and then watched an untrained farmer clear the same ground in a few swings of a hoe. That was the day I understood magic wasn't built for farming, and the tools couldn't be mended with magic afterward either. The rite overwrote what a tool truly was, and any repair spell would just insist it was broken again. Carrie was following all of it, the way she followed everything now, with her whole anxious face. Here's the shape of it, I said. To plow the land around this village, we need somewhere near 100 hoes. Wooden ones, that's all. And we've got a craftsman with an alchemy pot. It took Carrie a second. Huh? Me? Then the number landed. 100? 100, I said. Not enchanted, not clever, just 100 honest hoes. Can't we just mend them with magic as they wear out? That's the one thing we can't do. I softened it. You won't do it alone. And the rest of what we need, the coin we don't have, we'll trade for. We're sitting on something the outside world pays for. Arya reached over and covered Carrie's hand with her own. I'm sorry to put it on you. I'll get you everything I can, as fast as I can. Just do your best. Carrie let out a long breath and nodded, and I watched her decide to be equal to it. The days that followed were quietly good, except for the hoes. Carrie fought the ancient recipes, and the recipes fought back. The old alchemy books were written by people who thought measurements were beneath them. Soak the materials until covered, add a pinch. She'd read a line like that aloud, look at me, and I'd have nothing better than a shrug, because I'd learned the same craft the same infuriating way. She failed, and got a little less wrong each time. The hunting, though, had turned into a machine. We were killing at least one monster a day in the demon forest now, where before I came, they'd scouted a gray wolf maybe once a week. The forest never held snow, some old subspace trick that kept it warm as early spring under the trees, so the cold was only ever a problem out here on the walk home, which was where I saw him. We were trudging back through the drifts, the 6 of us, tired in the good way. And there, out past the wall, in snow that came up past the knee, someone was standing where no one had any business standing. Nobody traveled these roads in winter. Nobody came to us. I stopped, and the whole line stopped with me. There's someone outside the village, I said. Arya's tone dropped straight into the flat, sharp thing it became when she was afraid and refusing to show it. Can the 4 of you be ready to fight right here, the moment I say? Behind us, it happened without fuss. Sophie set her staff. Mira's fingers found her pendant, and a soft warmth settled over all of us. Leo's small blade came out of its sheath, and Carrie brought the crossbow up into both hands. Half a year ago, they'd been the people a kingdom threw away. Now they set their feet like a wall. Arya and I will go talk to him, I said. The rest of you stay ready. The stranger saw us coming and, of all things, waved. He was an adventurer. You could read it at a glance. The worn sword, the way he stood loose and balanced even hip-deep in snow. We waved back because it seemed rude not to, and the moment we did, he came sprinting toward us like a man who'd been cold for a very long time. I stepped in front of Arya before I'd decided to. Old habit, and a newer one. He pulled up a polite distance away, breathing hard, hands where we could see them. He was an adventurer, he said, hired to guard a merchant who'd come all this way to the village. Then he glanced past me at the wall and the moat, and the drawbridge pulled up tight against the gate, and I watched him fail to hide how much it unsettled him. What's a merchant want with our village this time of year? I asked. He spread his hands and grinned. Ask the merchant that himself, he said. If he went running his mouth and spoiled a negotiation, that came back on his name. And a man's name was the only thing an adventurer really owned. Fair enough. His name was Reed, and I decided I believed most of him. Arya told him plainly that she was the chief here, and the Margrave's niece besides. I felt him recalculate. He'd expected a rough little farm huddle and found a fortress run by a noble's blood, and it clearly didn't square for him. It wasn't supposed to. We'll lower the bridge, Arya said. Tell your merchant he can come in out of the cold. Reed thanked her and jogged back the way he'd come. And I did the thing I always did now when the outside world came knocking. I stepped back, out of the story. There was a rumor loose in the region I'd started to gather about a skilled alchemist who'd washed up somewhere on this frontier. Let it stay a rumor. Let them meet a chief and a village and never once meet me. The merchant's name was Silas, and he was exactly the kind of man who did well at this. Round, cheerful, quick-eyed, bowing to Arya like she ran a trading house in the capital instead of a valley full of exiles. I wasn't in the room. I was near it, close enough to hear, and I heard the whole thing. Mira poured tea, the sweet and bitter kind we brewed from herbs dried in the forest. Reed took the first cup to taste for poison, the proper careful thing to do. Then he made a small startled noise and drained the whole cup. And there was a silence in which a grown swordsman remembered he had a job and turned a fine shade of red. Silas laughed, covered for him, and bought the tea leaves on the spot. He and Arya settled the price with quick little hand signals. No words at all. Out here, words could carry weight you didn't intend, so the real bargaining was done in gestures. Reed had no idea what they'd landed on. Neither did I. Then Silas got to the reason he'd crossed a winter road. He'd heard, he said gently, that there might be an alchemist here, one who could make earth essence, and good earth essence at that. The Margrave had sold a batch of it, so pure it had turned heads all the way back in his town, and he'd simply followed the thread to its source. Arya blinked at him. The name meant nothing to her. Mira leaned in and murmured something at her ear, and I saw understanding cross Arya's face. The green stuff. The bottles we'd sent along with the Margrave. Arya's whole manner changed to the bright, practical thing she used when she thought she finally understood a trade. "Ah, is that the one we gave the Margrave?" she said. One moment, she sent Mira to go and ask me for whatever was left. Mira found me at the edge of the doorway, in the dark where the lamplight didn't reach, and I gave her what she came for. I'd been filling bottles all winter in the quiet hours, the way another man might whittle. To me, the stuff was practice. So when Mira asked for what was left, I handed her the big one without thinking twice about it, and only registered its size through her face as she took the weight of it in both arms. Then she carried it in, and I stayed in the dark of the doorway, and I watched a merchant's whole soul rearrange itself. Silas had been mid-sentence, easy and warm, ready to haggle over a small bottle the way he'd haggled over tea. Mira set the thing down on the floor in front of him. A bottle of earth essence as tall as a person, that green shine sitting placid in the lamplight, more of it than he had ever seen in one place in his life. His smile stayed exactly where it was. That was the part I'll remember. The smile didn't fall. It froze, stuck on his face like paint, while everything underneath it went somewhere else entirely. And for a long moment, the cheerful merchant simply could not make a sound. Reed had stopped breathing. Arya stood beside a fortune in a jar with her hands folded, politely waiting, having absolutely no idea what she was standing next to. When Silas found his voice again, he did an honest thing, and it moved me more than I expected. He told her the truth, that earth essence like this could only be made by a high-level alchemist, that a single small bottle sold, in the wider world, for several gold coins, that the Margrave had bought hers cheap, only because no one had been sure it was real. What sat on the floor between them was, he said carefully, a great deal of money, and she should be careful, because that much of it in one place was the kind of thing that got quiet villages visited by people far worse than merchants. Arya took the warning with a nod, and, unbothered, asked him for the thing she actually wanted. "What I'd really like," she said, "is a large alchemy pot. Even a broken one would do. Could you look for one?" Silas told her, almost apologetically, that alchemy pots weren't things you looked for. They were dug up, not made. The old world had known how, and the new one didn't, and one could cost as much as a castle. Then he stopped, because he happened, right now, to be carrying two broken ancient pots he'd taken off a town alchemist, and I watched the whole shape of the deal fall into place behind his eyes. "Then take all of this as the advance," Arya said, gesturing at the person-sized bottle like it was a sack of turnips. "There's more coming. We can settle the rest later." She had just offered a shrewd merchant a fortune for 2 pieces of broken junk, and she'd done it to keep her people fed. Silas looked at her a long moment. Then he agreed, and I could see him decide something private and firm while he did. He would come back. He would tie himself to this village before the rest of the world learned its door was here. He was going to be gentle with us, because being gentle was the smart long game, and because some small honest part of him couldn't quite bring himself to fleece the girl who didn't know what she was holding. I stepped back into the dark before he could think to look for the man who'd made it. Warm vindication is a strange thing to feel from a doorway, but that's what it was. Everything my people had built without knowing its worth, and it took a stranger's frozen face to finally show them what they had. I wasn't there for the next part. I never would be, but I could see it plainly enough, the way you can see the far side of a thing you set in motion long ago, and I'll tell it the way it happened. Far from our valley, in the capital that had thrown me away, the men who ran a kingdom were staring at a number they hated. The treasury had cratered. The great grain belt that had fed the crown's coffers now belonged, on paper, to Count Ashford, my father, the man who'd once handed me a border and 100 silver and his contempt. He was dead now, eaten on the worthless land he'd been so proud of, but his house and its territory remained, and the ledgers were bleeding. When the ministers reached for the obvious fix, taxing the county at the proper rate, they found something absurd underneath the numbers. Ashford's line paid only 5%, not 50 like a duke. 5. It was an old scar in the law. 15 generations back, a conquering king had needed to pacify a heap of rebellious houses, so he made a flood of new counts, handed them distant conquered dirt, and fixed their tax at a token 5% to buy their loyalty. High in rank, low in worth, and untouchable now, because half of them had married into the royal blood. The crown couldn't simply raise the rate, it would have to raise the house. There was a way, an old precedent, a king who'd once lifted a family to a dukedom by marrying a princess into it. Do that, and the 5% became 50, and the hole closed. Except the house they'd marry a royal into was a ruin. The count dead, his eldest son with him, the only heir a boy of 5. A household that blamed the crown for every grave in it, and would greet a royal bride with a cold hearth and colder faces. That was when the military minister said her name. He didn't argue that it was kind. He argued that it was owed. The whole collapse, he said, had started with the third princess, Amelia, refusing to marry that demon warden she'd been offered. Everything after was just the bill for that, so let her pay it. Let her marry into the ruin and set an example. And the king, her father, looked around the room for one man willing to object, and found none, not one. So he did the arithmetic a father should never have to do, and he agreed, and told himself an old foolish precedent had proven useful after all. So the girl who wouldn't marry the barbarian was married anyway, not to me, to the wreck of my father's house, the very name I'd been beaten out of and forbidden to carry. She arrived at those gates in the failing light, a princess spent like a coin to patch a budget, walking into a house that hated the crown that bore her. No one there would love her. That had never been the point. The point was a tax rate. I felt no triumph in it. I'd like to tell you some part of me enjoyed watching the people who discarded me devour their own, but mostly I felt tired and a little cold. The way you feel looking at wreckage you walked away from years ago and finding it still collapsing long after you stopped watching. She'd refused a chained dog of a marriage and been handed a worse one. The kingdom that couldn't afford to keep the man who held its border could, it turned out, always afford to spend a daughter. Silas left us early, before he'd wrung a single extra coin out of anyone. He promised to come back before spring, when the roads opened, and bring the 2 broken pots and whatever change an honest appraisal owed us. I believed him. He'd traded us metal and spices for our tea and forest goods, taken his fortune in a jar and gone, already planning the next visit. Come the thaw, we'd have pots for Carrie and Sophie both, tools enough to plow, and the wheat would go in on time. The village would keep its land. We'd been rich the whole while and hadn't known it, and now that wealth was buying the one thing we actually needed, which was to stay. A good trade. I let myself be pleased for about the length of a breath. Then I set it down, because I knew what it had cost besides money. The world knew our door now. A merchant would come back, and merchants talk, and behind them were the Margrave and her succession war, and a hunger for exactly the kind of resource we sat on. The snow that had sealed us safe all winter was melting. Whatever was walking toward us could walk now too. And there was one more thing, the last secret in this valley, the one I'd kept from every single person who'd chosen me. Not the fortress, not the true size of what I could do. Something quieter than that, and closer, and mine, carried under my sleeve where none of them had thought to look. Come the thaw, the roads would open in both directions, and out past our walls there were old ruins I meant to see. I had the feeling, sitting there in the warm with the ice letting go outside, that the frontier was about to stop letting me keep it hidden. Snow first, then money, both handled now, then the thing I was carrying. Has the merchant gone already? Arya looked up from the little pile she'd spread across the table and grinned. He had, before first light, honest to the end. She'd laid the spoils out like treasure, needles, salt, a bolt of good cloth, and the girls were leaning over it the way girls everywhere lean over new things. I asked about the alchemy pot. That was the one that mattered. He seemed sure of it, she said. Maybe by spring. We just have to have the earth essence ready for him before then. By spring. I turned that over. A second pot, a proper one, meant Carrie could make the 100 hoes we needed for the plowing without breaking her back a single tool at a time. She'd taken the job, but I hadn't missed the look she gave me when I first said the number. 1 a day, Carrie muttered, not quite complaining. If nothing goes wrong, I told her the new pot would fix that, and she brightened. Arya asked if I wanted to order books from the merchant next time. The ancient ones, from the old Magus age. I did want them, more than she knew, but I shook my head. An unknown trader was the wrong hand to ask. I'd go to the capital myself come summer and find them. Then I said the thing that made the room go still. Let's go a little deeper today, down toward the Grey Wolves. You'd have thought I'd suggested we walk into a fire. Carrie's mouth opened and shut. Even Arya hesitated, and Arya didn't hesitate at much anymore. We only scout, I said. No fighting. And if anyone so much as stumbles, I step in. Honestly, the 5 of you could outrun a whole pack now without me. That was true, and they knew it was true. And slowly the fear went out of their shoulders. Arya squared hers first and told the others they'd gotten into the rhythm of the forest. There was no reason to stop now. Sophie nodded once, small and certain. Mira followed. Leo had been quiet, which for Leo meant he was thinking about something. Then I mentioned we'd need to hurry to be back before dinner, and he came off the bench like a released spring. What? That's bad. Come on, let's go. I let him tow us all out the door. It's a good thing, having someone in your life who treats a late supper like the end of the world. It keeps the rest of it in proportion. The deeper we went, the heavier the air got. That was the mana. Thick as water down here, the way it always is where the forest keeps its better secrets. The monsters changed with it, and so did the plants, and Carrie's gathering bag was full before we'd gone far. I put Arya at the front, Leo out ahead to scout, the other 3 on the materials. It was a machine by now. We'd been running it all winter. Leo vanished into the green the way he does. There one blink and gone the next. He came back at a dead sprint, and my hand was already moving for the others, but he wasn't shouting the word. We had a word for real trouble, and this wasn't it. Big brother, he skidded up, breathless and shining. There's a building over there, all covered in moss, but it's got a door. A building in the demon forest. I felt the old part of my mind wake up. There are no buildings out here. The forest eats anything a person makes inside 3 days, pulls it down into the green and forgets it. Anything standing had to be older than that rule, old enough that the forest had swallowed it whole and kept it, the way it sometimes does, folding a thing into itself until the land calls it land, a ruin. From the ancient Magus civilization, the people who'd lived and built and died here, back when the world still had real magic in it. They don't show up on any magic sense, I told them. You only ever find them by eye. Leo just did what half the wardens I knew never managed. Leo went red to his ears. Arya frowned. Could a ruin really sit this shallow, this close to the edge? I said they could sit anywhere. The shallow ones were usually picked clean or empty. But I'd worked ruins before, back in my warden years, gone into unexplored ones with soldiers waiting to take whatever we hauled out, traps and all. I knew the shape of the work. Sophie spoke first, which she almost never did. I want to go, a beat. We might have to, later, in the deep ones. Mira picked it up the way she picks up everything, one careful step behind. Better to learn on a shallow ruin now than a deep one when it counted. Carrie waited until everyone had looked at her, then allowed that it was fine, if it wasn't too dangerous. Arya gave the order. We went to see what Leo had found. The door was wood, plainly cut by a hand and not grown by the forest. I had Leo check it before anyone touched it. He set his jaw and cast his trap detection. The trouble with that spell is it tells you nothing when there's nothing. No flash, no sound, just silence you have to trust. Leo held that silence a second, decided to believe it, then worked his unlocking spell into the latch. It gave with a soft click, and his whole face lit like a lamp. I'd already checked the door myself, quietly, before I let him near it. He didn't need to know that, he needed the win. Arya pushed it open. Inside was a hallway with 3 doors, one left, one right, one straight on. A house. Someone's actual house, sitting whole in the belly of a forest that should have eaten it 1,000 years ago. We went room to room, a living space at the end, a bedroom on the left with the bed still made. Everyday things left where a person set them down, as if the owner had stepped out one morning and simply never walked back. Nobody said it, but we were all thinking the same thing about where a person goes when they don't come home. The study was on the right, and the study had books. Most had crumbled to nothing, but 10 of them sat perfect on the shelf, spines bright, pages soft and whole. State preservation magic, the real kind. The kind the mid-era ancients used like we use a lock. 10 books that had outlived their whole world. Rain, this is wonderful, Arya breathed. Books from the magic age. I was reaching for one when Leo called out from the corner. He'd been running his hand along a bookshelf and found it wasn't flush with the wall. It sat on small wheels, and behind it was the black edge of a door nobody was meant to see. He grabbed to slide it. I caught his wrist. Traps first, I said. You found it. You're the scout, so you check it. I like hidden rooms as much as you do. That's exactly why places like this kill people. He grinned, sheepish, and cast again. The hidden door opened onto a workshop. That was the moment the day turned from lucky into strange. Shelves of materials that hadn't rotted in 1,000 years, the rare kind the kind you can't buy. And in the center, squat and huge, an alchemy pot, 10 times the size of the one Carrie fought with every day. Carrie forgot to be shy. "Isn't this an alchemy pot?" She was practically climbing into it. I clapped Leo on the head and told him this was all his find. He made a small, proud noise and beamed. For a few seconds, it was the best afternoon we'd had in weeks. Then Sophie's voice came quiet from the far shelf. "Rain, there's a book over here too." I turned. She had her small hand halfway to a book bound in blue. A blue that was wrong, that had a shine to it no dye makes, an aura coming off it like cold off ice. "Sophie, don't touch that." Her fingers were already on the cover. The blue went black. Smoke poured out of the book in a hard, silent rush, black as spilled ink, and it went straight for the smallest of us. I didn't decide to move. I was just there, between her and it, before the thought finished. For half a breath, the world was very small and very clear. There was a child behind me who had touched a 1,000-year-old curse without knowing what it was, and there was the curse, and there was me in the middle, which is exactly where I have always ended up, and exactly where I meant to be. Sophie saw only my back. She'd reached for the pretty book because it was beautiful, and because she is the kind of child who reaches for beautiful things. And now there was a wall of a person in front of her, and a sound like something being torn, and she understood all at once that whatever she had woken had gone into Rain instead of her. She did not cry out. She just decided, right there, small and fierce and certain, that she would take it back out of him somehow. She did not know yet that she could. She only knew that she would. The smoke went into me and I let it. It didn't hurt the way you'd think. It found the thing already living under my skin and it fed it. Cold climbed my arm, my throat, and I felt the mark move. The mark I've kept hidden every single day of this life, crawling up out of my collar, up the side of my neck, onto my left cheek, dark and branching like a crack running through old stone. The room had gone dead quiet. "Rain." Arya's voice was not steady. "Your face, that mark." There was no putting it away now. It was on my skin for all of them to see. "It's fine," I said, and even I heard how thin that sounded. Really, nothing happened that hasn't already happened. I told them the truth, because there was nothing left to tell them but the truth. My family, the Wardens, we've carried a curse since the old days, laid on us through a grimoire ages ago, and passed down blood to blood ever since. It weakens the body a little, and it takes the years off the end. It kills the one who carries it by about 50. I've known since I was a child that I'd die young. I stopped being afraid of it a long time ago. Nobody spoke. Leo's lip was trembling. Carrie had both hands over her mouth. That is the thing about being the strong one. The first they learn you can bleed, they look at you like the sky is cracked. I turned it back to the room, because I always turn it back to the room. This place, the hidden workshop, the forbidden book, it had been a witch cult hideout. People who tried to bring real magic back after the world outlawed it. That was why the grimoire could carry a curse at all. I bent and reached for the book, inert now, spent. The moment my fingers came near it shocked me back hard. A snap like winter static, refusing me. That stopped me cold. I looked at it. Then I looked at Sophie. "Sophie, try to pick it up." She was frightened. She'd just watched it strike me, but she trusted me more than she feared it. She reached down and lifted the book into both arms, and it lay against her chest, gone quiet and clear and blue again, as if it had come home. It had thrown me off. It had chosen her. "This grimoire," I said, hearing how impossible it was even as I said it, "has taken Sophie for its owner." Arya made a sound that wasn't a word. The smallest, quietest one of us, the child who barely spoke, and an ancient book had reached across 1,000 years and picked her. I wanted to be home. The curse was riding me harder than I let show, a low drag in every limb, and I still had the whole ruin to deal with. So I dealt with it the fast way. I opened my storage. I'd never done it in front of them. I'd kept it back all winter, along with everything else. The bottles of essence framed as ordinary stock, the true size of what I could do, folded away out of sight. There was no sense hiding it now. The mark was on my face. The last wall was already down. I took it all. The books, the materials, the great alchemy pot, the shelves, the furniture, the doors off their hinges. I fed the entire house into the space between my hands until the ruin stood scraped bare, a stone shell with nothing left in it but us. I heard the breath go out of all four of them at once. Arya turned to me slowly, and I watched her run back through the whole winter in her head. The fortress, the essence, the way problems dissolved whenever I was near, and start to grasp for the first time that she'd never once seen the bottom of me. I didn't give her the chance to ask. I told them we'd sorted at home and that we were late, and Leo latched onto late like a lifeline and got everyone moving. I was grateful for him twice in one day. We walked back through the dark, the mark cold on my cheek, and for the first time since I was 10 years old, there was no one left in my life I was hiding it from. That night, I sat in the workshop sorting through what I'd hauled out, mostly to have something to do with my hands. Most of it was junk. Good junk. 1,000-year-old junk, but junk. I kept my back straight and my movements easy because I could feel the curse pulling harder since the ruin, and I didn't want it in my face where anyone might read it. The door eased open. Sophie stood there, the blue grimoire held to her chest, watching me with those flat, calm eyes that miss nothing. "You're fine," you said. Her voice was very small. "But before, in the ruin, you looked like it hurt." I started to tell her I was fine again. She cut me off, which she has never once done. "The grimoire told me," she said, "that you're hurting." I didn't have an answer for that. She opened the book and she began to read. "I understand magic. I have spent my whole life understanding magic, and I still didn't understand what came out of that child. The words were an old tongue, long and strange, a chant with no bottom to it. I had one bad second wondering what a witch cult book might do to the boy it was aimed through, and then light came off the pages, soft and clean, and settled over me like warm water. 'Aqua cure,' she said, and the weight came off. Not all of it, but the constant drag I carry, the load I burn strength on every hour just to hold the curse still, it eased. My body went light. It was like being handed back a piece of myself I'd stopped remembering I'd lost. I sat there stunned, and not only from the relief, no one in my family has ever worked a single spell. We are the anti-magic line, the wardens, sorcery and steel, and nothing else, for as far back as the records run. And here was Sophie, doing the thing my blood was never supposed to be able to do. Her small face crumpled. "It's not perfect," she said. "This is the best I can do right now." She looked like she might cry, like she'd failed me. I pulled her in and held on before she could get the next apology out. "You saved me," I told her. "You understand? I feel like I've grown wings. I haven't felt this light in years." Her voice came muffled against my shoulder. Did I really help you?" "More than she would ever know." I told her so. She sagged against me all at once, the magic spent right out of her, asleep before I'd finished the sentence. I gathered her up, she weighs nothing, that child, and carried her to her bed and pulled the blanket to her chin. She was gone deep before her head found the pillow. I went to my own room and sat on the edge of the bed and, after a while, took out my grimoire. Not Sophie's, mine. The one I've carried since I was a boy, black, its cover raised in dark veins like something swollen under the skin. My family's book, the one the curse came out of, ages ago, and the one I've always believed the cure would have to go back into. I turned the pages. I can't read them. No one can. I have looked at these same marks 10,000 times, and they have never once given me anything. There was a stretch of my life I don't talk about, after my mother, when I was small and alone on the border, and I had just learned the thing in my blood would kill me before I was old. I spent years on this book. I chased every rumor, every half page of theory, every scrap of the old magic I could beg or buy, hunting the one thing that would let me outlive it. I wanted to break it. I wanted to be the warden the curse didn't get. I gave up somewhere in the middle, quietly, the way you give up on things that were never going to happen. I've spent a long time now telling myself it doesn't matter much anymore. Tonight, for the first time, I wasn't sure that was true. There was a child 2 rooms over who had reached across 1,000 years and pulled a piece of the weight off me without even understanding how. The line that was never supposed to touch magic had a girl in it who could, and I sat there in the lamplight with the unreadable book open on my knees and let myself think a thought I'd put away years ago. Maybe I didn't have to hunt it alone. I closed the book. There was more to it than any of them knew yet, where the curse truly came from, and who it was that had carried it before me, and what she'd done at the end of her own short years. But that was an old grave, and I'd let it stay one a little longer. Not tonight. I told the others the curse took my mother. That was true, and it was the smallest part of it. I never told them the rest, the hour she picked, and the thing she made me stand and watch. I was 10. Back then, I read one kind of book, and only one kind. Ancient Magus civilization texts, the brittle old ones nobody else could make sense of, stacked around me on the floor until there was barely room to sit. I wasn't reading them to be clever. I was reading them to find a way to break the thing in her blood before it finished with her. She leaned in the doorway one morning, and told me I read too much. She didn't say it like a scold. We had money, generations of warden work, monsters killed for coin, and no one left to spend it on but the two of us. So she let me buy whatever I wanted and clutter the house with it. Somewhere in those pages, I learned the curse fed on a poor body. Bad food, hard living, and it moved faster. So I started farming. Not with a hoe. I didn't have the patience or the years for that. I pulled the crops up out of the dirt with magic, burned through most of what I had in a morning to do it, and I bought every health remedy a passing peddler carried and every broken magic tool I could mend, until the room looked like a hoarder's den. She watched me do all of it and said nothing for a long while. Then, one evening, I couldn't hold it anymore. "Mom, I didn't look up from the book at first because it was easier that way. I don't want you doing dangerous things. If I could, I'd want you to quit being a warden. All of it. I want us to just live here, quiet, like this." The silence that came after was different from her usual silences. I looked up. She was staring at me, and I couldn't read the look on her face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't the fond, tired thing she usually wore. It was something that had made a decision while I was still talking. "All right," she said. She pushed off the doorframe. "Then I'm going to teach you the last of the warden secrets. Today's your final lesson." She told me to bring everything I owned, all my gear, all my equipment, even though, she said, I would only be watching. I should have heard it then. Final lesson. I was 10, and I only heard a lesson. She took me deeper into the forest than I had ever been allowed to go. Wardens train against the forest itself. You fight near things stronger than you, and the deep mana drags your own strength up to meet them, year after year, until one day you can kill what you once ran from. I knew that much. What I hadn't known was how far the deep went. The trees got taller and older until the light came down amber and slow, and the air pressed on my skin like warm water, and my mother started moving the way she moved on a real hunt. Low, quiet, every step chosen. Then the ground opened into a hollow, and I understood why. There was a place where the magic came up out of the earth. A dragon vein, she whispered. A wound in the world where mana gushed out raw. The air there wasn't air anymore, and curled around it, filling the whole hollow, was the dragon. I had killed monsters by then. Real ones. This wasn't that. This was a mountain that breathed. It slept with its great head down, and even asleep the size of it reached into me and turned something over. She pulled me back behind a fallen trunk and kept her voice under the sound of my own heart. That thing, she told me, only sleeps in the narrow slice of evening when the sky turns from blue to red. The rest of the day and all the night it's awake, and while it's awake, it drives every living thing out of the hollow. No warden could ever camp here, ever train here, ever get strong enough in its shadow to face it. It had made sure of that. For generations, it had kept her whole line small on purpose. It was, she said almost with respect, a very clever lizard. You're going to fight it, I said. It wasn't a question, and it came out wrong, too high. You can't win, right? You can't win against that. She didn't lie to me. That was the worst part. No, she said. I'll probably lose. And then she reached over and put her hand on my head and stroked my hair, slow, like she had all the time in the world. I want you to understand something. She had never done that. Not once that I could remember. My mother loved me the way a blade loves the hand that carries it, completely, and without much softness. So the moment her palm settled on my head, I already knew. Some animal part of me knew before she said another word. The truth is, she said, I don't have much time left. I started arguing before she finished. She was 30. The curse cut a life in half, 80 years down to 40. Everyone knew that. So she had 10 more. At least 10. I'd read it. It was written down. A woman who carries the curse and bears a cursed child, she said quietly, gives her own years to that child, so he can live longer. She let that sit. That's not in your books, but it's true. She rolled up her right sleeve. On the upper arm, there was a mark, dark, branching, and it moved. It pulsed, slow, like something under the skin taking a breath. In 5 years, she told me, it would cover her whole body, and then she would not be able to move at all. That was the shape of what was coming. Not a death. A slow closing of every door until she was locked inside a body that had stopped answering. She told me about a door I never knew existed. At the base of the big tree in our garden, a hidden room where her line had kept its records for generations. Her diary was down there too. She'd never shown me. She was showing me now because, she said plainly, she would most likely die today, and someone had to inherit it. You could have 5 years. I had her sleeve in my fist by then, both hands, like I was 10, and could hold a grown woman in place by wanting to. 5 years, Mom. Anything can happen in 5 years. I could find the cure. We go home, right now, and we think of something, and do what with them. She wasn't cruel about it. That was what undid me. Throw away every dream. Sit in that house unable to fight, eating and sleeping and waiting to rot. scared of my own hands. How is that different from being dead? Her voice dropped to almost nothing. I want to live until the very last second, until this heart actually stops. Not one breath passed when I stopped being me. I didn't have an answer. There wasn't one. My fingers were still knotted in her sleeve, and I made them let go, one at a time, because holding on was the only argument I had left, and it wasn't an argument at all. She smiled at that. A small, crooked thing. You should see your face, she said. I didn't even make that face when I saw off my own father. He died here too. Same lizard, same vein. Then the light in the hollow went the color of a wound. She told me to watch, only watch. And when it was over, whatever way it went, to run, not back to the house, just run, and keep running until the deep forest let go of me. I didn't say yes. She waited for me to say yes, and I couldn't make the word come. And in the end, she stopped waiting and turned around. The dragon woke the way a mountain would wake, if a mountain could. It didn't lunge up. It didn't roar. One enormous eye simply opened in the red dark and rolled toward the small figure walking into its hollow, and I watched it decide she was nothing. Not a threat, not even prey worth standing up for. It kept its head on the ground and looked at my mother the way you look at an insect that has wandered too close and isn't yet worth the effort of a hand. She kept walking straight at it anyway, small and red-lit, and completely unafraid. Hey! Her voice cracked across the hollow, bright and hard, and I flinched at how alive it sounded. Big lizard, I'm going to bring you down tonight. The eye tracked her. Nothing else moved. You'd want to know the name of the one who kills you. She drew the blade off her back, and the deep mana of the vein poured up the steel until it burned. So, I'll give it to you. She planted her feet in her father's dying place, under a bleeding sky, at the end of her own short years, and she threw her whole small self forward like a loosed arrow. My name is Althea Wolf, and she hit it. I had never seen my mother fight for real. She'd always kept the true shape of it away from me. Now I saw. The lit blade came down across the dragon's lowered head, and the whole hollow rang like a struck bell, and the mountain that had thought she was nothing snapped fully awake, with the vein's own fire scored into its hide. It reared. The head that had lain in the dirt tore up into the red sky, higher than the trees, and the ground jumped under me, and every instinct I had screamed the same three words. She is alone. I broke the one promise I never actually made. I couldn't say the word yes back on the ridge because some part of me had already known I would do this. I came off that fallen trunk and I was running before I'd decided to run, down into the churned dirt of the hollow, into the shadow of a thing that could have swallowed our whole house. The dragon's wings snapped open to lift it off her, and a grounded beast is a killable one. My mother's own lessons told me that, so I gave it everything I had at once. I threw the sharpest wind I could shape up into the joint of the near wing, a blade of air with all the deep veins mana crammed into it, and the wing folded the wrong way and would not open. The dragon came back down. It hit the earth so hard I lost my feet, and its eye came off my mother and found me. That was the plan I hadn't told her. The only thing I was good for down there, to be small and sudden and infuriating, to be the thing it turned its huge attention toward while she went to work on the rest of it. It swung at me. I was faster than something that size had any right to expect because it had spent generations making sure no one ever got strong in its hollow, and it had never once counted on a cursed boy who'd been fighting this forest since he could walk. So we shared it, my mother and I. It reached for me, and she opened a wound along its flank. It turned to crush her, and I raked its eye with wind and pulled it back to me, back and forth across the bleeding hollow, blow after blow, the two of us circling that grounded mountain like we'd trained our whole lives for exactly this. And maybe, in a way neither of us ever said out loud, we had. I don't know how long it lasted. In memory, it's one long red breath. Then she saw the opening. I gave the beast my whole voice and my whole self on the wrong side, and it lunged for me, and in the half second, its guard was mine. My mother went up the length of it with the veins fire screaming off her blade and drove the killing stroke home. The dragon came down. The mountain that had kept her family small for generations toppled sideways into its own vein, and the whole deep forest shuddered with the weight of it, and the red light guttered. And for one heartbeat, I thought, we did it. We actually did it. She's going to walk out of here with me. But a thing that old does not die on the first count. Even down, even finished, it moved. The great ruined bulk of it dragged itself around in the churned dirt, one last time, blind and dying, and following the only thing left in its shrinking world. The small red-haired figure standing too close, too spent, too sure it was already over. I saw it gather. I saw where it was aimed, and I was too far away, with nothing left in my hands but the scream already tearing out of me. The scream was still tearing out of me when my legs decided the rest. I had promised to only watch. I had already broken that promise once tonight when I came off the ridge and cut the beast out of the sky. I broke it again now, down the slope, across the churned dirt, straight at the small red-haired figure standing over the thing we had just killed, because it was not dead. The dragon had gone down under her last stroke and lay half sunk in its own vein, and for one whole heartbeat, I had let myself believe it was over. It was not over. A thing that old does not die on the first count. Even finished, even blind, it dragged its ruined bulk around one more time and gathered itself, and it was aimed at the exact patch of ground I was running into. She saw it before I did. She always saw everything before I did. Her hand hit my shoulder harder than she had ever touched me in my life, and the world tilted, and I went sideways into the dirt. The lunge that had been meant to find me found her instead, and in the same breath, the same refusal to fall before she finished what she had come here to finish, she brought her blade down into the beast one last time. The dragon shuddered from end to end. Then it stopped. The hollow went quiet. The kind of quiet that rings in your ears afterward. The sound of a thing that has been roaring for 100 years, finally holding still. I got up out of the dirt. I was 10 years old, and my hands were shaking, and I could not understand why she had not gotten up too. She was on her knees in the dirt, one hand still on the blade to hold herself up. I was across the space before I knew I had moved. I got my hands on her, and I poured everything I had into them. All the mana I had spent the whole day hoarding, every scrap of the healing I had read about and barely practiced, because I never thought I would need it, because I always thought she was the one thing in the world that could not break. The light gathered under my palms, and it closed the small hurts, and it did nothing at all for the one that mattered. "Don't talk," I told her. My voice came out wrong. "Stay still. It isn't closing. Just let me work. It isn't closing yet. Don't talk yourself." She caught my wrist. Even now, her grip was stronger than mine. "Look at the state of you. Your own scrapes haven't closed and you're pouring it all into me. Stop wasting it." I did not stop. I could feel the shape of it under my hands. The wound the books had a name for and no cure for. The kind healing magic could not reach. It could mend what was on the surface and nothing underneath. I had known that for 2 years. I had written it in the margin of one of my own books. I had just never once imagined I would be kneeling in the dirt of the deep forest, wishing I had spent every one of those 2 years learning nothing else. "I'm sorry," I said. The words kept coming, and I could not stop them either. "This is my fault. I interfered. You told me to only watch, and I came down anyway, and it turned on me. And you? If I had just stayed on the ridge like you said, it would have gone for nothing instead of for you." "What are you saying?" It was not a question. She said it the way she said everything she had already decided. "If you hadn't come down off that ridge, I would have died on the first pass, and the dragon would have flown away to keep my grandchildren small. You didn't cost me anything. You made sure it was worth something. There's a difference, and I want you to learn it before you learn anything else." She looked past me at the great dead shape in the vein, and something almost like interest crossed her face. "So, it can still move," she murmured. "After a blow like that, I never knew that. 60 years my family has come here to die on this thing, and not one of us ever wrote down that it gets up again. The old texts think the biggest beasts have 2 of everything," I heard myself say. 2 hearts, 2 minds, 1 in the skull, and 1 further down. So a killing blow to the head only tells half of it to stop. I was babbling. I knew I was babbling. It was easier than the other thing. You'd have to end both. We ended both. It just took the long way around. She laughed at that. It was a small sound, and it cost her, and she did it anyway. The red light went out of the sky and the stars came up, and the vein under us gave off its own faint glow, and she let me settle her back against a fallen trunk, because kneeling was too much now. She studied me for a long time, not the way a dying woman looks at her child, the way a warden looks at something in the forest it has not cataloged yet. "Let me talk," she said. "Since it's the end, let me. First, I want to say your magic has improved. Truly. I've been meaning to tell you, and putting it off, the way you put off the things you're proud of. You've gotten strong, stronger than the lesson." Then the other thing came into her eyes. "And now I want you to answer me honestly, because there's no time left to be clever. What are you?" I went very still. "You were talking before you should have crawled. You read faster than the men who wrote the books. You argue like a man 3 times your age who has already lost the argument once somewhere else. 2 brains in a dragon. You said that like you'd read it over breakfast 100 years ago. I've watched it since you were small, and I told myself it was a blessing, and I never once asked because I was afraid of the answer." Her voice did not shake. Mine would have. "I'm not afraid of anything now. So, what are you?" I had carried it alone for 10 years, every hour of every day, in a body too small for it, in a house with the only person I could never tell. And here at the end, she was asking, and I found there was nothing left in me that wanted to lie. There's a word for it in the books, I said. Reincarnation. I was born already carrying the memories of another life, a whole one. I lived it all the way through, somewhere else, a long way from here. I grew up, I worked, I got old and tired, and I died. And then I opened my eyes and I was a baby, and you were holding me, and I understood every word you said. I made myself look at her. I'm your son. But there was a man before me, inside me, the whole time. That's what I am. That's the thing I never told you. For a moment, she said nothing at all, and every second of it was the thing I had been afraid of my whole small life, that if anyone ever saw the real shape of me, they would step back. Please, I said, and my voice finally broke. Please, can I still be your son? She lifted her hand. It took her a while, and she set it on my head, the way you would settle a bird, and she left it there. I don't understand half of what you just told me, she said. I don't need to. Whatever you were before, whoever that tired old man was, wherever he lived and died, you were born out of me, and I raised you, and you came down off that ridge tonight when I told you not to because you couldn't stand to watch me go alone. That's a son. That's my son. There was never a question in it. You're the one who's been carrying a question this whole time, all by yourself, for no reason. Her thumb moved once against my hair. Put it down. I put it down. 10 years of it, right there in the dirt. And I cried the way a 10-year-old cries, because for the length of that night, I was allowed to be one. Tell me then, she said, the other life. I want to know it. We've got until morning, and I'd rather spend it learning my son than watching the sky. So I told her. I told her about a city so large you could not see the edge of it, and lights that never went out, and a small desk I sat at for too many years. I told her about the friends whose faces I could still see, and whose names I had started to lose. I told her the foolish things, the food I missed, the songs, a game I used to play badly, the rain on a train window. I told her the man I had been, the way I would have told her about a stranger we both used to know, and she listened to all of it. And now and then, she asked a question so exactly right that I understood she had always been the smartest person in either of my lives. Somewhere in the telling, her answers got shorter. Then they got slower. Then, at the part where I was describing snow, they stopped. For one paragraph, let me tell you what I have decided she felt, because a son is allowed that much. She felt the cold go far away. She felt the boy's voice keep talking, steady, unafraid now, telling her about a whole world she would never see and did not need to, because the only piece of it that had ever mattered was kneeling right in front of her, safe and grown and hers. She had come to this hollow. Every warden of her line came to die, and she had done what none of them managed. She had made the dragon fall, and she had gotten her child up off the ground and out from under it, and there was nothing left owing. She let go of it the way you let go of a rope at the end of a long climb, when you can finally feel the ground. The sky went from black to gray, and when I looked up from the snow, she was gone, and her face had settled into something I had almost never seen on it while she lived. It looked like rest. Across the hollow, the dragon's body thinned in the pale light and came apart into nothing, the way the big ones do, until all that was left of the mountain that had killed my family for 3 generations was a single dull stone lying in the churned dirt. I had sat on the dragon vein the whole night without moving. I did not know yet what that would do to me, that a night on a wound in the earth like that pours more power into a body than 10 quiet years ever could. I only knew I did not want to leave, so I stayed until the light was full, and then I made myself stand up. I buried her there, not because I couldn't carry her out. I could have. I buried her on the dragon vein because it was the place she had spent her whole life trying to reach, the ground her father died on, and his father, all of them cut down here by the same beast for the same reason. She had finally taken it. It was hers now. It seemed only right to leave her standing on the thing she beat. I raised the stone over her myself, with the magic she used to tell me I read too much about. It was the best work I had ever done. I have built a fortress since, out of bare dirt, in a night, and I have never once been prouder of anything than of that small grave in the deep forest. You never liked grave visits, I told her. You said the living had no business bothering the dead, that if you spent your hours crouched over a stone, you weren't really living. You were just waiting to join it. So I'll try. I'll try not to come too often. My throat closed. I don't think I'll be very good at it, but I'll try. Then I stood there and was very bad at it for a while longer, and the forest let me. They came out of the trees while I was standing there. White wolves, 10 of them, easily. Big as ponies. Their coats so bright, they looked less like beasts than like something out of the old holy paintings. The forest's power had shifted the moment the dragon fell, and here was what had been waiting under it for a chance to move. I did not have grief left over for fear. I raised one hand and cut the air with a single wind blade, the same spell I had used my whole life, the only one I ever really needed. And when it was done, 9 of them were on the ground and would not get up. The last one did not run. She rolled onto her back in the leaf litter and showed me her belly, and lay very still, watching me with one pale eye, the way a thing does when it has decided a stronger thing is not going to hurt it. Female, I saw, and enormous. And when I put a wary hand on her, absurdly soft. "You're not going anywhere, are you?" I said. It wasn't really a question. "Fine. You look like something out of a story my other life had. A great wolf that swallows the world at the end of everything. I'll call you Fen." Something turned over in my chest when I said the name. A small, warm, settling click, like a lock finding its key. I did not have a word for it then. A bond, I think. The kind that only forms when a thing is named and means it. "Stay here," I told her, and I nodded back toward the small stone under the trees. "Guard that. She won't like visitors, so keep them off her. I'll come when I can." Fen huffed and put her chin down toward the grave and did not move again. I buried a hand in that ridiculous fur one last time. Then I turned around and walked out of the demon forest, 10 years old, alone. And for the next 5 years, I never told a living soul any of it. I stopped talking. The fire had burned down low while I told it. The 5 of them were exactly where they had been when I started. Arya on the bench, with her arms locked around her knees. Mira, very straight and very pale. Carrie with a hand pressed over her mouth. Leo openly, wetly crying. And Sophie in the corner with the grimoire held to her chest, watching me with those flat blue eyes that never miss anything. They already knew about the curse. They had found the mark on my neck days ago, the dark branch of it climbing my cheek, the thing that had killed every warden in my line and was, on its own quiet schedule, killing me. That was why I had finally opened my mouth. They deserved to know where it came from, so I had told them all of it. The cottage, the ridge, the dragon, the stone in the dirt. The hour my mother chose, and why. I had told it the way you set something down that you have carried too long, and I had braced the whole way through for the part I always brace for. The part where people who learn what a thing really costs to keep decide it is not worth keeping. I have been braced for it my entire life in both of them. I put them all on the luggage cart of my own heart before they could put me there first. It is the only way I have ever known how to be safe. Arya stood up. "You absolute idiot," she said, and her voice cracked straight down the middle. "You've been sitting on this. You've been dying, quietly, off in a corner, doing your own funeral in your head, while we've been right here." She wiped her face hard with the back of her wrist and did not manage to make it stop. "Well, you don't get to. Do you understand me? You held the whole world up for people who paid you in copper and threw you away, and you never asked one single person for one single thing. So we're not asking either. We're telling you. I've read a third of it." Sophie's voice came flat and small out of the corner, and every head turned. She lifted the grimoire an inch. "The book, the part that eased it, that was a third. There's more. I'll read all of it. However long it takes, I'll read all of it, and I'll find the rest of the cure, because it's in here. I know it's in here." A pause. "You're not allowed to run out before I finish." Mira was next, folding her hands in her lap the way she did when she refused to let them shake. "You gave me back my hands," she said quietly. "You told me the thing I was taught to be ashamed of was the most valuable thing in the room. So I'm going to spend it on you, every day. Whatever the wound underneath is, we start closing it now, not at the end. Now. And I'll build whatever she needs to do it." Carrie was already scrubbing at her eyes and squaring her shoulders in the same motion. "Tools? Focus stones. A whole workshop if the book asks for one. You point at a thing that would help, and it exists by morning. That's what I'm for. You showed me that too." Leo did not make a speech. He crossed the hall and shoved his wet face against my side and grabbed a fistful of my shirt, exactly the way a smaller version of him must have grabbed a brother who did not come home. And he said the same thing over and over into my ribs. Too muffled to be words, but too clear to mistake. "Not you too. You're not allowed." I sat there in the firelight with the mark burning cold on my neck and all 5 of them in front of me. And the thing I had braced against my whole life simply did not come. They knew the worst of it. They knew what I was, what was in me, what it was going to cost. And not one of them stepped back. Every one of them stepped in. My mother, at the end of her life, on the night she died, gave me the one thing I had never had. She looked at the real shape of me and called it her son anyway. I had thought that was the once-in-a-lifetime you get of a thing like that. I had built my whole quiet life around the certainty that it was. I was wrong. It turns out you can be chosen twice. I did not say very much. I have never been good at saying things when they matter most. My mother knew that about me, but I let them see my face come apart, which for me is the same as a speech. And Arya sat back down close enough that our shoulders touched, and nobody moved to leave. And for a long time, we just stayed there together while the fire ate down to coals. The curse is not gone. Sophie has a third of a book and a promise, and the rest is somewhere ahead of us. The kingdom that beat me and sold me and forgot me still owes a debt it has not begun to pay. And out past the walls, a war is turning its head slowly toward this small valley full of the people the world threw away. All of that is still coming. None of it is finished, but I am not carrying it alone anymore. For the first time since a woman set her hand on my head in a dead forest and told me to put it down, I am not carrying any of it alone. And that, it turns out, is the part that changes everything.